América Latina y el Caribe hay más de 165 millones de jóvenes y adolescentes. De ellos, 110 millones se ven afectados por el desempleo, la informalidad y la inactividad. La mayoría carece de las habilidades necesarias para navegar con éxito la vida y el trabajo. La pandemia solo empeoró este problema. Se estima que 3.13 millones de estudiantes en la región abandonaron sus estudios y la brecha educacional se disparó. Hoy, más que nunca, debemos actuar y colaborar entre el sector público, privado y la sociedad civil. Lo que está en juego es el 17% del Producto Interno Bruto agregado de un grupo de países de la región. Las habilidades para manejar los cambios permanentes y tener vidas saludables, productivas y felices son esenciales. Conceptos como perseverancia, colaboración, ciudadanía digital, pensamiento crítico y comunicación son la clave para enfrentar nuevos desafíos. ¿Cómo equipamos a los jóvenes para prosperar? ¿Cómo creamos más oportunidades para la región? En el Día Internacional de la Educación, únete al encuentro regional Habilidades para la Juventud. Invertir en el capital humano en América Latina y el Caribe. Organizado por el Banco Interamericano de Desarrollo con el apoyo de JP Morgan.
Buenos días a todos y bienvenidos a nuestro evento Habilidades
Good morning,
para la
ladies and
Juventud,
gentlemen, and
Invertir
welcome
en el
to
capital
our
humano
event,
de América
Skills
Latina y el
for
Caribe.
Young
Soy
People
Matilde de los
Investing
Milagros
in
Londoño,
in
soy
Human
periodista
Capital in
y
Latin America and the
editora
Caribbean. I
feminista
am
y trabajo
Matilde
todos los días
Milagros
para que se
Londoño.
avancen los
I
derechos de las
am
mujeres y
a
las
writer
diversidades en la región.
on feminine
Y estoy
issues,
feliz de
and we
acompañar este
continue to
evento
work
híbrido
for
en
improving
donde vamos a hablar de
rights
manera
for women
presencial y
in the
virtual
whole
sobre los
area
nuevos
of the
retos
Americas. So
educativos de
we're
la
going to
región.
have both virtual
Saludamos a
as
los
well as
distinguidos ministros y
in-person
ministras de la
participation,
región que nos
looking at some of the
acompañan
key
hoy,
challenges. We'd
al
also
equipo
like
de
to
JP
convey
Morgan
greetings
y
to the
del BID
ministers
y
from
a
the
los
region who are with
participantes y
us,
panelistas,
also to the JP
invitados e
Morgan
invitadas
team and the
especiales y a
IDB
cada uno
team
de
members, as well
los
as
expositores
special
y
guests
audiencia
and
presentes.
panelists, as well as
Quisiera
each one
también
of
enviar un
our
saludo
speakers
especial
and
a quienes
audience
nos
members. We would
acompañan en
also
vivo
like
desde
to
diferentes puntos de la
convey a
región
special
y
greetings
distintos
for
países.
those of you who
Hoy
are
desde el BID
connected
y con la
from
ayuda de
various
JP Morgan
countries throughout the
celebramos
region.
el
So
Día
today,
Global
with the
el
IDB
Día
and the support of
Internacional de
JP
la
Morgan, we are
Educación de las Naciones
celebrating
Unidas, que
the
este año tiene como
International
lema
Education Day of
Invertir
the
en las
United
personas,
Nations this year.
priorizar la
Its
educación.
motto is
Para
to
honrar esta fecha,
invest
hemos
in
reunido
people
a
and
líderes
prioritize
globales del sector
education.
público y
In order
privado
to
y expertos
honor
en
this
educación para que nos
special
compartan
occasion,
diferentes
we
perspectivas
have
en la agenda
various
educativa
experts from the
regional
public and
y
private
su
sectors
actual
who are going to
enfoque en
share
las habilidades
their
del siglo
perspectives on
XXI.
regional education and the
Para entrar
current
en
focus
sintonía con
on
nuestra
the
audiencia y
skills for the
panelistas,
21st century.
quisiera empezar
To be
presentando al presidente
in
del BID,
harmony with
el señor
the
Ilan
content, I would
Goldstein,
like to
quien
first
nos dará
introduce
unas palabras de bienvenida.
Elon Goldstein, who will just express a few words of welcome.
Good morning and welcome to the Inter-American Development Bank. I'm sorry I could not join you in person on this International Day of Education, but I could not be more with you in spirit. That's because we at the IDB believe that skills building for Latin America and the Caribbean is at the heart of the region's development. As I mentioned to the IDB Group's employees and partners in my inaugurational speech, social issues are my first priority, and education is crucial for our development agenda. As you all know, skills are a key driver of productivity. The best way we can improve productivity is by adding value to every hour worked. That is done, among other ways, by helping our people upskill and become more competitive. To increase the size of the pie, we need to improve productivity. And that can be done in part by building the skills relevant for today's job market and the job market of the future. Unfortunately, 36% of our region students don't complete secondary education today. And of those who finish, only 19% actually acquire the capabilities they need for life and work. Tackling the low productivity and competitiveness that have plagued the region is at the heart of the IDB efforts, and it starts in the classroom, in person and virtual. Skills are also a critical catalyst for social mobility. For too long, people's prospects in our region have depended on their socioeconomic background, entrenching and increasing inequality over multiple generations. Narrowing the skill gap between students from different income levels is one of the most powerful ways to reduce inequality. We know that many education systems in Latin America and the Caribbean were failing long before the pandemic. But COVID-19 has added new urgency to respond to this crisis of learning. Indeed, the past 3 years have been devastating for our students, leaving a legacy of educational and development losses that will take years to overcome. By the end of 2021, schools in the region had been closed for an average of 237 days, more than anywhere else in the world. The pandemic also accelerated changes in the nature of work, and rapid technological advances have created new challenges and opportunities in the labor market. Education system must evolve to provide people with relevant quality skills. And so, the question of interest and the reason we are here today is how can we transform education to ensure that young people form the skills they need to thrive in our fast-changing world. We need to consider evidence-based alternatives for improving literacy and numeracy and use new technology and teaching methods that increase students' autonomy. We should lean on the latest thinking about skills really matter for social and emotional development, starting in early childhood and all the way through adult learning. To do this, we need all the different stakeholders to sit around the same table, and that is what we are doing here today. We should also be mindful of non-traditional actors who are opening new spaces and offering disruptive alternatives in the search of more effective approaches to education. Last year, our bank's innovation laboratory, IDB Lab, invested in Slang, a Colombian education technology startup that uses machine learning and artificial intelligence to teach English to manual workers. Our financing is allowing the platform to expand to other countries in the region, bringing practical and low-cost courses to more people and giving them the skills to engage, enlarge their career options. To make lifelong learning a reality, we all need to work together. And to meet the needs of 165 million young people in Latin America and Caribbean who face a rapidly changing landscape, we must redouble our efforts. That's why the IDB launched its 21st Century Skills Coalition. And that's why we are continuing to expand the community of partners who share our vision. I want to give special thanks to the JP Morgan Foundation for its strategic support and for co-hosting this event. I also want to thank our illustrious guests for joining us, as well as our audience in Latin America and the Caribbean around the world. I wish you all a great event, and I look forward to working together to equip and empower the next generations. Thank you.
Muchísimas gracias, señor presidente, por sus palabras. A continuación, tengo el gusto de presentar a Demetrios
Thank you
Marantes,
very much,
director global
President.
de
Now I'd like
responsabilidad
to
corporativa de
introduce
JP Morgan,
Alejandro
quien se
Metro, who
sumará
is
con
in
sus
charge of
palabras
social
de apertura.
responsibility from JP Morgan, who is going to offer
Hi, everyone.
some
My
few
name is
words
Demetrios
of welcome.
Marantes, and I lead JP Morgan Chase's corporate responsibility team. While I wish I could join you in person, I'm grateful to Mercedes Mateo Diaz and the whole IDB team for being such fantastic partners and giving me the opportunity to say a few words before you kick off what is sure to be an interesting and thought-provoking program. Today's focus on helping young people gain the skills they'll need to launch their careers is something we at JP Morgan Chase think about and talk about often, in part because we see that every day the future of work isn't 10, 25, 15 years away, it's now. We're focused on creating pathways to opportunity and to helping more people access the resources, the tools, and the support they need to prosper. But for too many young people, particularly those in underserved communities, these opportunities are out of reach. By 2030, some estimates show that more than 375 million workers globally will need to change jobs or upgrade their skills to advance within the workforce. And in Latin America, the situation is especially concerning. 15-year-old students in the region are at least 3 years behind in reading, math, and science compared to their peers in OECD economies, and nearly 1/4 of jobs face a high risk of automation. So as the global economy transforms our labor market, it's imperative that we also transform how we prepare young people to compete for well-paying jobs. One way we're doing this is by partnering with nonprofit organizations across Latin America, as well as regional partners like the IDB, to provide low-income students with skills training and career readiness programming. For example, we're collaborating with the IDB and other partners on the Sacudete program, which helps disadvantaged young people connect with employers and educational resources. So far, this program has benefited thousands of young people, a testament to the impact we can make when the public, private, and non-partner sectors come together as change makers. Because no single entity can tackle issues this complex, this intersectional, and this important alone. We must work together to create opportunities for young people from all backgrounds and promote economic growth that is truly inclusive at its core. This isn't just about helping people across the jobs access jobs in today's world. It's about creating a diverse, innovative, and capable workforce for the jobs of tomorrow. So thank you very much for being here today to dig deep on these important topics. It brings me great hope that this talented room of individuals is gathering today to discuss ideas and solutions that have the power to build a brighter future for more people across Latin America and the Caribbean. And I look forward to joining you at a session like this in the future. Thank you.
Muchas gracias, presidente Ilan y director Demetrios, por darnos la bienvenida.
Thank you very much, President Leland, and also the Director Demetrios of this program with the JP Morgan organization. For those that would like simultaneous interpretation either into English, Spanish, or Portuguese, you have devices that you can pick up in the back.
Ahora, ¿cómo podemos ayudar
Now,
a que los
how can we
estudiantes
help
tengan vidas
to make
prósperas
sure
al tiempo
that
que buscamos reducir
young
la
people and
desigualdad?
students can
¿Cómo
get
podemos
better paying
ayudar a
jobs
crear
to help
más
reduce
oportunidades?
inequality? How can we create
Para
better
responder
opportunities?
esta y
In
otras
order to
preguntas,
respond to
tendremos
these
el gusto de
questions,
conversar con uno
we
de los
have
líderes
the
más
pleasure of
importantes en
of
este momento,
listening to
uno que ha
one of
dedicado
our
su vida a la
special guests,
transformación
someone
de la
who has
educación.
spent their lives
Démosle la
in
bienvenida a
in the
Andrea
transformation
Schleicher
of educational
de la
opportunities. Andrea
OECD, matemático y
Schleicher
físico alemán,
from
reconocido por ser el
the
propulsor y el padre de las
OECD,
pruebas PISA.
OECD Director for
Moderando
Education
esta
and Skills.
conversación estará
And we have
Regalía,
Ferdinand
gerente
Regalia,
del sector social
Director
del BID,
of the
apasionado del
Social
desarrollo en la región.
Sector
Adelante,
Manager at the
Ferdinando y
IDB.
Andreas.
Go ahead, Ferdinando and Andrés.
Thank you. Thank you, everyone. To all those who are following us online and all the present, it's really a great pleasure to be here with you. Andreas, welcome. It's a real pleasure for me to interview. I'm a big fan of yours. You are really a star in this space. So thanks very much for joining us to spend some time in this, I hope, very interesting conversation. Let me start with a question about skill. You and I think, are more or less of the same generation. Year more, year less. I have much less hair than him, and you seem to handle aging much better than me. But when I was young in school, in my early years, all my education was focused on really the foundational skills. So learning to read and write, science and math. Very little about collaboration, very little about critical thinking, very little about creativity. So an easy question for you. Do you think my life would have been easier if in my early education, they would have incorporated more forcefully these competencies?
First of all, Fernandino, thanks so much for inviting me. And on your question, you might not have your job if you wouldn't have found some way in your life to develop those kind of social collaborative skills. Took a lot of effort. Even if you didn't get them in school, I think, but at the same time, it doesn't work for young people anymore in this way. You know, you have so many young people in the Latin Americas who, you know, have ticked all the boxes. They graduate from university and then they cannot find a good job. And at the same time, employers tell you they cannot find the people with the skills they need. And I think the dilemma that we face today, and you know, in our generation, that was not so much an issue, is that the kind of things that are easy to teach, easy to test, the accumulation of subject matter content, they've become easy to digitize, to automate. Now we know how to educate second-class robots. You know, people are good at repeating what we told them, but you know, what's going to make us human in this world that no longer rewards you just for what you know? Now Google knows everything. That rewards you for what you can do with what, you know. And I do think the young generation therefore face a much, much tougher future where, of course, you know, you need to have those foundation skills like literacy, numeracy. They give you access to higher order thinking skills. But if you do not move beyond that, you know, you can no longer navigate this world. If you cannot distinguish fact from opinion, you know, literacy skills alone won't help you. And I think that is the different times in which the next generation lives. So yeah, absolutely. I think, you know, our lives would have been a lot easier had our school system placed greater emphasis on 21st century skill. But today, it's no longer luxury. It is really, I think, the essence.
So we all know you are the Director of Education and Skill of the OECD. Tell us a little bit more. I mean, within this room, we all know what the PISA assessments are, but probably maybe someone online won't know. But particularly, if what you're talking about drove the changes of the PISA in 2018, mm-hmm. And if you talk a little, explain to us a little bit those changes.
Yeah, you know, PISA sort of is the global yardstick for education quality, is a tool where we measure the outcomes of learning directly. We don't look at how much you spend on education, how long you study. We actually test directly what students know, what they can do. That's the logic of PISA, and we do that with, you know, hundreds, thousands of students every 3 years so that we get a really robust and reliable picture on learning outcomes. But, you know, when you construct a yardstick, you need to make sure that it remains aligned with our times. I'll give you an example. In the year 2000, when we started with all of this work, literacy was mainly about extracting prefabricated texts. You know, when you didn't know the answer to a question, you can look it up in an encyclopedia, you can trust the answer you find to be true. That was literacy. Today, you look up things on Google and you get 100,000 answers to your question, and nobody's going to tell you what is right and what is wrong, what is true and what is not true. Literacy is no longer about extracting knowledge, it's about constructing knowledge, a very different skill set. So PISA evolved. Now it looks, you know, it asks you actually, can you contrast, critique, and so on. Same for mathematics, you know, we teach trigonometry to 15-year-olds, but actually, you know, you find few opportunities in life to use it. And so PISA now looks at computational thinking. You know, can you actually, if you don't understand the nature of an algorithm, you're going to be the victim of that algorithm soon after. But then 2018, we found actually that also that is no longer enough. We live in a world where you have to, you know, engage with people who think differently from you, where you have to be open to appreciate different ways of thinking, different cultures. We call that global competency. You know? And that is not just about, you know, people relating to people in other countries, but often it's your neighbor. You know, it comes from a different kind of tradition, way of thinking, and so on. So PISA in 2018 added that dimension of social and emotional skills, things that actually employers value greatly, and we try to make them visible so that they become tangible and part of our education culture rather than being seen as, you know, add-ons that you develop, you know, after school. Because again, in today's world, they're no longer a luxury. They are the fundamental. You know, the first day you do your first job interview, you figure out what those character qualities are. And young people who haven't got that, you know, from their family, they're pretty much on their own. So that was really the transition in 2018 that we went through, sort of broadening the kind of knowledge and skills that PISA assesses. It still looks at foundations, you know, absolutely, we're never going to give that up. But it gives a clear signal that that is just the entrance ticket. To be successful, you need to be able to use and apply your knowledge.
So let me follow up on this. This was launched in 2018. do you get a lot of pushback? And how much room there is still to convince that this is a very useful instrument?
Yeah, you know, the pushback is quite clearly visible. You know, when we test mathematics, we get 100 countries around the world participating. For global competencies, you know, less than half than that. And I mean, education is a very conservative social enterprise. And, you know, we as parents are sometimes more part of the problem than part of the solution. You know, we get very anxious when our children no longer learn what was important for us, or when they start to learn things that we no longer understand. Teachers are more likely to teach how they were taught than how they were taught to teach. And as a minister of education, many here around will know that, you know, you can lose an election when something goes wrong, but you're never going to win an election over education, because it's going to take so much time to translate good ideas into better outcomes. So yeah, it is tough, but I don't think, you know, that should frighten us. I think that is, you know, the mandate of public policy, actually, to advance the agenda, to prepare people for their future, not for our past. And, you know, that's what we are trying to do with PISA. And gradually, this agenda is taking on. So I'm actually quite optimistic.
So you say there's pushback everywhere, but also a lot of commitment. So how do we promote these new competencies at scale? I have a very active conversation with my team. I don't come from the education sector, so they teach me everything every day. And they say, okay, we're promoting critical thinking, but if we have a lot of kids that cannot even understand the text now, or it's great to promote computational thinking, but if a lot of kids don't master even basic numeracy, how do we going to go about this?
Yeah, but you know, I think you're not going to see basic numeracy and basic literacy for kids who do not understand why they should be learning this. And I think we have lost so many young people in Latin America who no longer understand why they should go to school. They learn stuff, you know, their education has become a mile wide and an inch deep. We teach lots of stuff at superficial levels, and it doesn't engage young people. We need to start really more with the why, you know, how do we educate, you know, confident citizens, collaborative, you know, workers, and then ask ourselves, you know, not how can we compile a long list of subject matter content, we have that, but, you know, what are the kind of learning environments that help people develop those skills? You know, one of the things from our data that is very clear is integrating the world of work and the world of learning gets you so much better results than sitting people just in classrooms. The most important career decisions you don't make when you graduate from school, you make when you start school. Your first day of school, you start, you know, am I going to take this serious? What are my favorite subjects and so on? And I think if we engage, if we build a broader set of learning environments that, you know, encourage that student agency, that give young people more ownership over what they learn and how they learn and where they learn and when in their lives they learn, we are going to see also better foundation skills. You know, foundation skills come through relevance. They do not come by teaching a long list of, you know, subject matter content. And then, of course, you need to ask yourself, you know, who are the people who can enable that? How do we configure, you know, space, time, people, technology to build those learning environments? But I do think that's really the agenda.
So I think it's very important when you mention about really connecting more the world of work with the world of learning. Yeah, we have a great audience of both public and private sector stakeholder. So any recommendation for that? How to what is their contribution, the contribution they can give to accelerate this shift in the paradigm?
You know, Fernando, I think this is one of the most critical questions. In education, we have a culture of public versus private. You know, we build public schools and public universities and private universities, and that's often more part of the problem than part of the solution. We need to build more of a culture of public with private in service of the public good. I give you an example. You know, again, work-based learning is so much more powerful than just, you know, academic learning. That's where the employers are needed. They need to become not just consumers of skills, they need to become part of that skills ecosystem. New technologies in education, they won't fall from the sky. We need to engage, you know, the education systems and the private sector in the development of tomorrow's learning environment. Sort of this culture of public with private, I think it's going to be absolutely critical. And think about this, not just about young people, you know, the biggest challenge for all of us will be, you know, that upskilling and reskilling. How do you get actually people to continue learning throughout their lives? And I think that will not happen in the public space alone. It needs to be, education will only work as a whole of society enterprise. You know, we have actually seen a very unhealthy trend towards what I would call commodification in education. You know, as a student became a consumer of learning content, teachers are kind of service provider, parents are clients, and we need to bring people back that everybody has a responsibility to make this work, including employers, and you see many countries in which employers play a fantastic role in that ecosystem already.
That's great. And the last question, we are a few days into the new year, and we still say each other, Happy New Year. So we all make New Year's resolution. What is your New Year resolution for education in 2023?
You know, I think let's find better trade-offs between the present and the future. You know, Chinese parents are going to invest their last money, the last time in the education of their children, which is the future of the country. In the Western world, we have spent the money of our children for our own consumption. That's why we are heavily indebted. And I do think we need to get that right. We need to balance it right. We need to see the future as then what we invest in the education today is, you know, the schools today is going to be our economy tomorrow, our society tomorrow. And I think as humans, you can, and that's true educationally, it's on the climate front, we need to learn to make better trade-offs between, you know, living today and establishing tomorrow.
I support that. So thanks, Andreas. Really a round of applause, and very honored to be here.
Más de la mitad de los jóvenes de 15 años.
More than half of the young people in the region lack the abilities of math, sciences, or reading. As an average, they're 3 years behind the OECD countries. To learn algebra, you must first learn to multiply to send an email. You must first learn how to form sentences, how to ensure that all the children acquire these basic skills. The bank collaborates with ministries across the region to implement evidence-based foundational learning models. This allows students to learn to solve authentic real-life problems at their own pace and collaboratively while respecting their native language and cultural context. Let's turn these foundational skills into a priority. These are the foundation of success in school and in life.
Andreas
will hear talking about the human and the emotional component that education must have. But we also know that human beings have to learn skills in reading, writing, and math in order to develop more advanced skills. And nowadays, it is more necessary than ever to strengthen these skills in order to close the learning gaps. And on this, we will hear the following experts. Minister of Education from Ecuador, Maria Brown Perez. Distinguished Minister of Education and Science from Paraguay, Ricardo Zárate. Harry Anthony Patrinos, advisor, the Office of the Chief Economist for Europe and Central Asia at the World Bank, and Dr. Amber Gove, Fellow at the International Development Group and Director of International Education. In order to moderate the panel, we have with us Emma Naslund Hadley, IDB Education Specialist. This will be a discussion in English and in Spanish, and you can join the code that you see on the screen in order to share your question. At the end, we will select a few so that it will be answered by the panelists. Emma, please proceed. You have the floor. And I ask you to please speak closer to the mouth, directly into the mic, so that we can be sure we have good quality of the audio. We have a top-of-the-line panel this morning with experts who devote their lives to advocacy, promoting the development of basic skills, reading, math, writing, science. So I'd like to begin with the macro vision and to say why it is important to develop those basic skills, and not only the skills of the 21st century that were being described by Andreas and Ferdinando.
So Harry, I'd like to start with you, because you've long argued for the importance of the development of basic skills for economic well-being of our country. So what's the connection between basic skills and the economic well-being of our countries?
Yes, thank you. First, let me say that the returns to education are significant. Every year of schooling improves or increases earnings by at least 10% worldwide. So the investment in education and skills is very important. But also we've learned that it's not simply attending school that makes the difference. It's what you learn in school. So the test scores that Andreas talked about are very important, along with other skills. But the fundamentals, the basic reading, the skills that you receive in your first 2-3 years of schooling are the pathway, the gateway to the higher order skills that will determine your success in life, in the world of work, your productivity, and national economic growth. We, using our HLO data, we've estimated that if we improve learning outcomes, is measured by test scores, such as PISA and others, by 1%, national economic growth will be higher by 6%, conservatively. So there's a huge payoff to improving the basic skills that people need.
Thank you, Harry. You really make a convincing case for investing in basic skills. That's a really large payoff. And Amber, beyond these strong economic rationales for investing in basic skills, you have looked a lot at the importance of learning basic skills for continued learning, the concept of skills that beget skills. Would you comment and explain a little bit the reasoning behind that idea?
Sure. Thanks so much, Emma, and thanks for having me here today. Foundational skills, as Andres mentioned, as Harry mentioned, are really key to the long-term learning trajectory of students. It's really hard to read your math textbook if you can't read. And we know also that curriculum and what teachers expect from students really changes over time. So acquiring those foundational skills in reading and math in the first 3 or maybe 4 years of schooling is critical because the curriculum changes at about 4th grade and teachers are no longer really teaching kids to learn to read. They're at that point really reading to learn. We also know that math is actually a greater predictor of later reading skills than reading itself. So we can't do one without the other, and they need to work in combination. This can be exciting and connecting to world examples. It doesn't have to be rote memorization, but we have to get the basics right in order for children to succeed, graduate from primary. During COVID, this has become even more important. We've had children, as others mentioned, out of school for hundreds of days. And catching those kids up with remediation programs, with approaches that are structured and can help both teachers and students get back on track is really going to be key for a lot of these countries.
Well, thank you. I have to make a follow-up question when you start mentioning the pedagogical approaches and changing, because in Latin America, the classrooms look often, when you visit and do classroom observation, you see classrooms that often look very much like they did like 100 years ago. It hasn't changed that much. In reading, it's a strong focus on sight words. In mathematics, then kids spend a lot of time plugging numbers into formulas, developing what we in education call procedural understanding of mathematics. You learn the math procedure. But given that those pedagogical approaches haven't produced improvements in learning, we see like there is not much improvement in learning in the region. Does Latin America need to change what's happening in the classroom? Do they need to rethink the pedagogy used in classroom instruction?
That's a big question just to put on me, but happy to at least start tackling it based on my experience and that of my colleagues. So I work for a nonprofit research institute, RTN International. We are both what I kind of call a think tank and a do tank. So I'm fortunate enough to be involved in research and evidence building, but I also get to work and support ministries of education around the world in implementation of programs. And what we're working on right now is a big multi-country research program supported by the Gates Foundation called the Science of Teaching. And we're trying to distill all of these lessons from all of these countries where we've been able to collaborate with ministries into really actionable research briefs and other pieces that both policymakers and practitioners can use. And one of the findings that we're pulling out from these lessons from large-scale learning at scale programs, it's another part of the research package, is that structured pedagogy, right? When you take a package of materials, that are aligned to global and national standards, and you support teachers in having them teach those structured lessons on a daily basis. You provide them the training and support that they can do that. You provide books on a one-to-one ratio. You get all of the right pieces in place as sort of a minimum but not totally sufficient package of content that can be delivered. You can really get success. So over several years in Kenya, for example, we supported the ministry in 25,000 schools, delivered 26 million books, worked with 7.5 million learners. And in the same package and approach, we're able to get the percentage of kids reading at grade level from a low of 12% to 27% for grade 2 learners. This was, again, a scientific evidence-based package that when it all came together, really supported the learners, supported the teachers, and demonstrated results. There's both an art and a science to teaching reading and teaching math, particularly in the early years. I give all the credit in the world to the art of that teaching, to the teachers that we have working really, really hard in their classrooms. We need to bring a lot more of the science to the conversation and support those teachers to deliver on what we know about the science of early reading and early math instruction.
Thank you, Amber. Gustaría ahora pasar a la,
And now I'd like to move to how we can translate these experiences to changes in Latin America and the Caribbean. And then, Minister Brown, I know that you have designed this based on the evidence mentioned by Amber. You have designed a whole curricular reform that attempts to go from the teaching of knowledge and data to learning of skills. So maybe you can share with us a little bit of that experience and its implementation. First of all, I'd like to thank the bank for this invitation, the entire staff for the organization. In fact, this reform process brings with it three main causes. The first one is that pre-pandemic in Ecuador, we've had assessed the quality of the teaching, and this was said in the conversation with Andres previously. The results of pre-pandemic teachings showed huge challenges, amongst other things, national assessments which show that close to 7 out of 10 children in Ecuador do not have the basic skills of reading and writing, and a similar number in math. This means that more than half of the school population under 4th grade does not have the ability to read or write and have a basic mathematical operations. So this is truly quite alarming, and it shows an educational crisis pre-pandemic that not only has to do with how we teach, but also this art teaching. Not necessarily does this imply a change on how this has been proposed in the curriculum and the learning of these basic skills, but we do need to assess how this is being translated into pedagogical practices in the schoolroom that have to do with the attitude in teachers more than the curriculum itself. So simple elements as a teacher that receives questions empathically with the students, look into their eyes when they talk to them, they create a safe, secure environment for the student to learn. Not necessarily the reason why they do not acquire these teachings, it's the curriculum or the methodology proposed, but also this empowering environment. This is one first challenge that we saw in Ecuador with several assessments that we've done with the support of international cooperation organizations, even longitudinal on how we acquire these learnings, such as the case of closing gaps, where we've seen that it is not only the what, but the how, and that how has to do with the emotional side of it. Then the second reason, in order to reconsider what is happening in the educational system, was the pandemic, and we were lagging behind already in a significant way, and this is common to many of the countries in this region, and we have a lag of approximately 2 years, a whole generation or maybe 2 whole generations of children, and many of them reach 4th grade, where we went from learning how to read to use reading for learning, and to have those basic foundation foundational, essential skills to move on to the next level. And the third reason is because we've also seen in the course of the last decade an increase in the deception of the young people about the educational system. Not to understand why I'm there, what is this all about, how is this useful, and to find a place in the labor workforce instead of being in a schoolroom, and to realize that you have to review the what. And thus we proposed a reform that goes hand in hand with what we've seen in international research. First, to thin out the curriculum, to prioritize the essential skills, particularly during the first years of learning, but also after that, because we encounter curriculum that are very dense, very heavy, full of content, all important, but we can find, as Andres was saying, things in Google, and not necessarily a lot of skills in order to solve problems for empathy, skills for work and for life. And so this reform proposes that, how to prioritize in foundational skills to reduce the gaps of those who have not acquired these in the right frame of time. And this demands leveling and educational reinsertion programs, but also a curriculum reform that proposes a change of the curriculum, a curriculum that is heavily based on memory and cognitive knowledge, to a curriculum that will be focused on skills for life and for work. And that goes hand in hand, and we'll see this later on, with a reform of how we assess and what is learned by our pupils, and how we assess the performance of our students, and what do we do so that these changes can little by little be translated into elements that will transform the schoolroom. And therefore, we are very much aligned with this international trend of talking about transformation of education, because in fact, these are not changes that we believe ought to take place very slowly, but they do require a real comprehensive transformation of the system, a change, 180-degree change that no doubt poses huge challenges. Thank you, ministers. I'm very pleased to hear you, because you're doing precisely what evidence shows that we must do, to have a thin, meager curriculum, to work on improving the environment in the schoolroom, and to go from memorizing data and concept to a scientific thought, etc. I love that. Thank you very much. Minister, I'd like to ask you, what initiative do you have in order to promote foundational skills that you've worked on? And which one is more exciting to you? What is the most interesting experience that you've worked on? First of all, greetings to all. It seems to me that this issue of foundational skills brings with it a topic that has not been touched on, which is essential, the family. We must understand that current youth lives in three worlds, from my point of view: the virtual world, the school, and the family. These are three worlds. They will spend 30-40% in the school, 30-40% in the virtual world, and then the family. And working with the families is essential from my point of view. It was very difficult for us. We're undergoing a process in order to try to include them, but without the families, these foundational skills are not possible, cannot be acquired. We have to involve the family. And it seems to me that this offers us a great opportunity, because all that this generation, what they learned in school nowadays, is no longer useful. We have to re-educate the families through the student that brings that homework to their home. They have to transform, as you said, they have to transform their parents so that they will have the skills to find a job. Like Andrea said, people have titles, not one title, several titles, but they're jobless. That is our greatest challenge that I see, and the family is essential. And something that Andreas said, you don't win elections with or elections or without education. They're not interested in this education. When you work on the issue of education, you're doing this in the very long term, and one must think about the political benefits. In my country, trying to promote educational promotion at a time of elections was a very serious mistake. I take the responsibility, but education in my country is going through a critical situation, just like in Ecuador and the rest of Latin America and in the world. We have to be humble enough and say that education in the world does not respond to what the young people want. Why is there so many dropout levels? Because education is not attracting that interest of the student. Thank you very much. And thank you for introducing that point of view of the family. Because clearly we need the parents as partners in order to make sure that children will go to school.
Harry, beyond like pedagogical change and also the work and the engagement of parents, what other more system level policies are needed to ensure that we really can improve learning and foundational skills in the region?
Sure, thank you. I'd mention three things. One is having the political and financial commitment to improve learning outcomes. I think along with the political statements and the policies, you need to finance these programs. That would be number one. Second is the measurement. The minister, the honorable minister from Ecuador mentioned this in her analysis. If we don't measure these things, it's hard to improve them. So measuring, monitoring, and using this information, and then finally having an investment plan for improving learning outcomes, specific, the same way that a government might have an investment plan for bridges and such. We need the same in education. And I think the information, there's a lot of information in Latin America, a lot of information globally on learning outcomes. It's not always well disseminated to the schools, to the parents, to the communities. And when it is, we see tremendous results. We've seen this in experiments all over the United States. We've seen it in Latin America. We did an experiment several years ago in Mexico, in the state of Colima, where we simply provided schools that were underperforming with their scores on the state exam. Within an academic year, they improved learning outcomes by 12 points, about half a year's worth of learning, just with that information going to the school principals and teachers. In Pakistan, an experiment with giving report cards that parents could understand, learning outcomes improved by about half a year. In Poland, by postponing the vocational track in high school and giving people therefore more content on reading and math, their scores of those students that would have been underperforming and been selected into the vocational track improved learning outcomes by a standard deviation within a 3-year time period. And it took Poland from below OECD average to, I think at the time, 8th place in reading on the PISA scale. So information is huge for improving learning outcomes.
Thank you. So I'd like to put this to the test with the ministers. Ministra Brown Pérez y
Ministra Brown Pérez y Ministro Zárate. How viable do you see these proposals of policies mentioned by Harry? That is to say, the will, to have the political will of investing in something that is in the very long term, such as education and basic skills, and constantly measuring and publish, which is very important in the example that he gave us, publishing the findings so that it will be evident that schools are doing better than others. And last but not least, to have an investment plan in basic skills. Why don't we start with Minister Zárate? Well, I always say that if we don't have laws that will ensure investment in skills, be it through a financial plan funded through a law, that is doomed to failure. But the way the resources, as the economists say, are always scarce and the needs are infinite, then we must know how to select. Nowadays, in a world in economic crisis, where to invest. We've said that the best investment is
Entonces, nos
early
gustaría invertir en
childhood.
todos los sectores.
That's
Nos
where we get
gustaría
the
tener
best
una ley
results.
por el
We'd
Plan
like to
Nacional de
invest in all
Transformación
sectors.
Educativa,
We
que en
need
mi
one
país paso a
law
invertir 1.100
that in my
millones de
country
dólares
goes
a
from
3.300
$100
millones,
million
llegar a 5.000
to
millones,
300
pero eso
to
no es
5
posible, no
billion,
es
but that's
viable
not
y no es
possible. It is not
realizable,
viable, and
lastimosamente.
it is not
Yo creo que
reachable,
tenemos que
unfortunately.
propiciar
I believe that
leyes
we have to
para
promote
garantizar
laws
que
in
los
order
pasos
to
del
ensure
gobierno
that
no sean
government
pasos en
steps will
políticas
not be
públicas.
steps in public
Invertir
policies.
en primera
To
infancia es
invest in early
fundamental porque lo
childhood
que
is essential
perdemos ahí
because
no
what
se
we
recupera
lose
nunca
there
más.
is never recovered.
Yo creo que hay que dar
It seems
foco
to
a la
me
inversión.
that
Esta
very
inversión
little
es
has to be
posible,
given
pero
to this investment. It
descentralizada
is
no podemos
possible,
invertir en
but
todos
it
los
must be
niveles.
focused and
Tenemos que
investing
empezar
in all
por
levels.
primera
That's very
infancia.
difficult. We have to start with early childhood.
Bueno, yo siempre
Okay,
digo que yo soy
I
una
always
optimista
say that I'm an
empedernido.
optimist, a
Y creo que
devoted
para estar
optimist.
en
And
la
it seems to
política
me
pública
that in
educativa
being
uno
part
tiene
of
que
the
ser bien
education and
optimista
public
y yo
policy,
sí
you have
creo
to
que
be a real
es posible
optimist.
hacer cambios
And I believe that it is
significativos.
possible to bring about
Y
significant
creo
changes.
que no
And
solamente
it
se
seems
trata
to
de
me
la
that
voluntad política de
it
un
is not
líder
only the
de un
political
momento a
will
otro,
of a
sino
leader
también de
at
la
one
voluntad
time,
y de la
but
voluntad
the
de
will
la
and the
ciudadanía.
will of the
Yo sí quiero
citizens.
traer a la
I
ciudadanía,
do
así como el
want to
ministro trae
bring
a la familia
citizens
a la
into this,
ecuación, a
just
la
like the minister
ciudadanía,
brought
porque
family into the
cuando
equation.
se
I want to bring in the
debate
citizens
públicamente
because when
cuáles
we
son
have a
las
public
prioridades
debate
de un
about the
Estado,
priorities
pues
of a
debería
state,
estar en el centro del
then
debate
it
también
must be at the
educación.
very center of the
Cuando se
debate. We
debate
must
cuál
bring
es
it
el plan
into
de gobierno
education.
de
When
una
we talk about
autoridad,
the
debería estar en
government
el centro
plan,
de ese debate
it
también cuál es
must
la
be at the
propuesta en
core of
materia de
this debate.
educación.
What
Y
is the proposal on
típicamente los debates
education?
en
And
esta
typically
materia
the
son muy
debates on this score
superficiales y van,
are very superficial.
diría yo, desde
And
un enfoque
they
muy
go from
populista,
a very
en donde se
populist
ofrece
approach
una serie
where they
de
offer
bienes
a
de
whole
corta
set of
duración, ¿no es
goods,
cierto? Que sean
short-lasting goods
visibles,
that are
políticamente
visible,
rentables y no
politically
necesariamente transformaciones
profitable, and
de
not
fondo. Y
necessarily
creo que allí
deep,
ahí
profound
el éxito es
transformations. And the success of it
precisamente
all
tener un
is
pacto social
precisely
por
to
la
have a
educación,
social pact
un
for
pacto en el que
education,
exista la
a pact
voluntad
where we can
política,
see the
sí,
political
pero
will,
también el
yes,
compromiso
but
económico
also the
dentro de las
economic
restricciones que el
commitment
ministro
within the
menciona.
restrictions
Siempre
mentioned
el
by the
sueño de
minister.
cualquier
The
ministro de
dream
Educación
of
es
any
tener la
minister of
duplicación de
education
su
is to
presupuesto
have
o
a
más, lógicamente, y no
twofold the
creo que solo
budget
el
or
ministro de
more. And I
Educación,
believe that not only
sino de
for the Minister of
muchas otras
Education,
carteras
but
de lo
many
social
other
dentro de
portfolios
cada
dealing with the
estado.
social
Eso
aspects in each
sin
state.
duda puede
And that no
mejorar
doubt
y poco a
can
poco
improve.
con la voluntad
And little by
política
little with the
también
political will,
incrementar el
it can
presupuesto, pero
also
también
raise the
necesitamos de
budget,
la
but we
cooperación
also
de
need
del
the
concurso de la
cooperation
ciudadanía, del
of
sector
all
privado, lo
citizens of the
decían
private
en el
sector. And
panel
this was
anterior
said
y
in
en
the
esta
previous
conversación, la
panel
importancia
with this
del sector empleador,
conversation on the
de
importance of
las
the employers,
organizaciones de la sociedad
the
civil, de
organizations of
los
civil
mismos
society,
colegios, instituciones
the
educativas
colleges, educational
particulares,
institutions,
todos
private
trabajando para
institutions,
sensibilizar
all
a
of
la
them
ciudadanía
working
de
in order
por
to
qué
raise
esto es
awareness in our
importante para
citizens
que
as
no
to why
dependa
this is
solamente
important,
de la voluntad
so that
política
it
de
will
una
not
persona,
only
de una
depend on the
administración,
political will
sino
of
que sea
one
una demanda
administration or one
ciudadana
person,
y que
but for
las
this to be a
políticas
citizen
educativas
demand,
continúen a
and that
largo plazo.
educational
Y
policies will
allí
continue
sí,
in the
el
long
rol
run,
de, por
and that
ejemplo,
therein the
la Banca
role of
Internacional para el
international
Desarrollo
banking
esencial, es
sector for
fundamental. En la
development is
revisión de
essential
cuáles son los planes de
in
inversión
reviewing the
de nuestros
investment
países,
plans of our
el poner
countries,
dentro del debate con
being
los
able
ministros de
to
Economía, con los
include in the
ministros de
debate with
Finanzas,
ministers of
este
economy,
tema es
ministers of
también
finance,
un
bringing
valor
in this issue
agregado que se puede
is
dar
an
ese tema
added
de la
value
voluntad
that we can
política.
bring into this
Y
issue of
sin duda
political will.
también yo veo que
And
es
no doubt I
posible
see
hacer
that it
estas
is possible to
transformaciones.
have these transformations.
Yo lo decía hace un rato,
And I was saying
hablar de
this
la
some moments ago,
transformación
to
y no
talk
de
about
cambios
transformation
moderados
and not moderate
en un
changes
momento como este.
at a
Creo
time
que es
such as this one. I
propicio
believe that
hablar
it
de
is
estas
high time to
transformaciones
talk about
post-pandemia
these
porque
transformations
al
during the
menos yo lo veo
post-pandemic,
así,
because
no
at
sé
least
si es
this is the
solo
way
mi
I
impresión,
see it.
pero
I don't know if
tenemos
it's
más
only my
evidencia que
impression, but we
probablemente
have
nunca
more
antes de
evidence
la necesidad de
that
este
perhaps
cambio.
never
Tenemos
before
una
for the
sociedad
need of
más
this change, that we
más
have a
sensible
more
a lo que
sensitive
sucede dentro de las aulas, luego
society,
de
being
prácticamente 2
aware of of what happens in the schoolroom after 2 years of having hybrid models of the teaching. Families are questioning what is happening in the schoolroom. They see how teachers work remotely. They got involved in that. They realized how difficult teaching is, that they greatly valued our teachers by having our children at home and being very close to what was happening in order to continue with that learning. And therefore, the conversation on education still has a positive inertia, and not losing that inertia and bringing about these changes in a radical and quick way before we go back to doing things the way we did this in the past. If we do things the way we've been doing things before the pandemic, we will not bring any transformation, no change. We will simply find a place there because it's the most comfortable thing to do things as you've done things. And there are people like us, I believe, ministers, that sometimes we have to be a bit uncomfortable and to propose challenges. And those challenges must be challenges that are attainable, measurable, based on information in order to bring about confidence. And so research and public policy based on evidence is essential for decisions not to come from the stomach, from the guts, but to come from an analysis of what has happened and to consult. This is the last thing that I'd like to bring to your attention. Many times these thoughts stay at a very high academic or political level, and we don't include our youth and the children in this decision-making process. And it seems to me that this must always be considered when designing a public policy on education. They are the beneficiaries, and to hear them, to give them an active voice in that decision-making and also in the design of the curriculum, where they can tell us what they want to learn, how they want to learn it, what sort of learning environment are they expecting for this to be more relevant, not only for the companies or for those who develop or create jobs in the future, but for them who are really involved in this process that many times lasts 13 years. All of that is possible. And therefore, I was saying that I'm an optimist. I'm a devoted optimist, and maybe sharing this optimism with many more people, because whatever change is difficult, I'm saying that it is like growing up. When you're a young person, it hurts, it's painful, and these changes are also painful. Thank you very much, Minister.
I love that idea of the will, respecting the will of the citizenry and looking at the entire community, including the development bank. I think we have time for a few questions from the audience. I have here a question for Harry.
To invest in foundational skills from an early age is no doubt an important policy message. But what do we do with the large numbers of youth that are about to enter high school or already are in high school but don't have the foundational skills required to learn? What can education systems do to foster foundational skills in teens and young adults?
Great question, and very timely. I just read some new data that as a result of the school closures, many youth have not come back to school. And I suspect it is people close to compulsory school age or close to the age where they'll be writing the selection exam. So again, three thoughts. One is compensatory programs, focusing on the learner and their gaps. We know that programs like tutoring work very well. One-on-one tutoring, small group tutoring, to bring students back up to the grade level. They're very expensive, but we learned during COVID that online tutoring is just as effective and can be delivered at a fraction of the cost. So we have one tool that we've learned about. The other one is to motivate students. I think for many students, they don't find school engaging. So changing the way the lessons are delivered. There have been experiments with creating these entrepreneurship courses, not to make people entrepreneurs, but to teach them math skills that could motivate students as well. And maybe also second chance education for those that don't make it or don't want to come back to the classroom, some other alternative form. But to prevent the large number of people that are dropping out just before the selection year, maybe we should consider the selection exam and go comprehensive, focus on mastery learning, and make sure that all students are successful in high school.
Thank you. Tengo acá otra pregunta para Ministro Zarate.
I have a question here for Minister Zarate. How can we leverage the educational tools in order to help children to develop these foundational skills? Well, I was thinking, I think that's, I would say, one additional step from our current situation right now. When we look at these classes in classroom events. It's really not something that we're currently doing, but we're starting to embark on that. Now, we know that AI is now being used in the classroom, and I think that is relieving a lot of the burden on the teachers, so that now the teachers can focus on those areas that are lagging behind. We want to focus on that. We want to experiment with that, but we're still at a fledgling stage. So I think we need to look at how we can use AI, artificial intelligence, so that we can relieve the teachers to be able to, so from some of their burdens, to be able to pay special individual attention to the students.
Amber would be good to answer. It's about measurement and how we can use measurement to help close COVID learning gaps.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks for the question. Perhaps one way to think about it is, well, la vaca no se engorda solo pesándola, or the cow is not going to get fat just by weighing it. So assessment is part of a system, like a thermometer when our children are sick, for identifying that there's a challenge, but we still need to work on fixing it. So a robust assessment system that ministries can use needs to have lots of components to it. It needs to have simple assessments that teachers can use in their own classrooms to diagnose early learning difficulties, to put students in the right reading or math group, and to provide them the support that they need. Open source assessments like EGRA and EGMA, or Evaluación de Lectura Inicial, that we've developed in 2006 with support from USAID and the World Bank, have been really helpful in expanding that kind of opportunity for countries and for teachers to support learning in the classroom. Also part of that assessment system need to be those national scale system level thermometers that a minister can take and look at and look across all of our system and see this region or this particular language group needs a lot of extra support. We should be investing more in those areas. And then lastly, for that international comparison, assessments like PISA, PIRLS, and TIMSS are really useful for motivating internal and external policy choices. They can be really helpful in garnering additional resources. We need more support, can't you tell? We're competing against these other countries. The Global Proficiency Framework is new and out in the last couple of years. It was a collaboration between UNESCO Institute for Statistics. I was going to give a shout out to the Minister of Uruguay. They participated really strongly in developing that Global Proficiency Framework. So there are lots of assessment tools out there. They all need to work together in collaboration to inform system improvement. Measurement alone is not going to get you the learning gains that you want.
Y aquí tengo otra pregunta súper interesante.
I have another very interesting question here that I would like to just give to the minister. Why do you think that there's a trade-off between the foundational skills and the 21st century skills? Well, first of all, I don't think there's a trade-off, personally speaking. I think it is a progressive process. I think this was addressed in the previous panel, that foundational skills are enablers to make education more autonomous. And it's also essential in order to have autonomy in the acquisition of these foundational skills. There is no trade-off. They complement one another. But perhaps where you do see a challenge is the fact that we've been aware about the need to acquire the basic skills throughout history. And what really sounds something new, maybe it's a newer debate, not a recent debate, is to incorporate life skills, skills-based learning. And so in that regard, this is probably more innovative in some environments, but that doesn't necessarily mean that there's a trade-off, but it does require streamlining and the curriculum and shedding those topics or subject matter that are not essential anymore or needed. We're not talking about those skills that are enablers. They're not, basically, we need, well, information, interesting, useful information that will pad a curriculum, but don't necessarily need to be there. And maybe we can lighten our knapsack of these content so that we can streamline the skills learning process. Fascinating discussion, and there's a lot more questions from the audience, but I'm being told that we've run out of time. So again, I thank you very much for your participation.
Demasiado interesante tener
It's just
esta
so
combinación de
interesting, so
expertos con
overwhelming
políticos,
having this
para
combination
ver
of
qué tipo de
policymakers
retos
and
tenemos.
experts
Evidentemente, en la
addressing the
región hay
types
un
of
reto también
challenges that we're
político.
facing. Obviously,
En
we also
países
have
como Colombia lo
policy
vemos
challenges in
en
Colombia, for
temas
example,
que
in
se
areas
proponen
that are
para las
proposed
legislaciones, como por
for
ejemplo la
legislation,
educación
for example,
sexual y reproductiva
sexual and
integral, y en el
reproductive
momento en que se llega al debate
education.
legislativo,
And once it gets
se
down
va
to the
a la muerte.
floor
Estas
for debate,
discusiones no prosperan. Entonces,
the
qué
bill
interesante
dies
ver
on the
cuáles son los
floor.
retos, incluidos los
So we
políticos.
need to look at some of those
Y con
political
todo esto en mente,
challenges as
nos
well.
vamos a un coffee
So
break
with
de
that,
15 minutos.
we have a 15-minute coffee
Quisiéramos
break.
invitar a quienes
We'd
nos
like
están
to
oyendo,
invite you, those who are online listening
virtualmente,
to
a
us,
que nos respondan por
please
chat esta pregunta.
respond to this
¿Cuál ha sido
question
la habilidad
online.
que más
What
les
is
ha
the
ayudado a
skill that
llegar
has
a donde han
most
llegado en
helped
sus
you
vidas?
in your life?
Entonces vamos a estar muy pendientes
So
de
we're
esa
going to be
respuesta
eagerly
y les
awaiting
agradecemos
what your
que en 15
answer
minutos
is
regresen
to
para
that.
continuar con nuestra agenda.
And so
A
once
nuestro
you
regreso tendremos
return,
el gusto de
we
escuchar
will
en vivo
continue
al
with our
keynote
agenda. We're
speaker
going to have our
Jeffrey Sachs,
keynote
un
speaker,
reconocido
Jeffrey Sachs,
profesor de economía a
who is a
nivel mundial,
renowned
autor de
professor of
bestsellers,
economics
educación,
worldwide.
educador
He's the
innovador
author of
y líder
many
mundial en desarrollo
bestsellers,
sostenible. Los
including
esperamos en
he's
un
a world
ratito y
leader in
disfruten su
sustainable
coffee break.
development. So we are eagerly awaiting that presentation. But for now, we have the coffee break.
Bueno, ya todos están de
Well,
regreso y
everybody's
estamos
back,
listos para
and we are
oír
now ready
en vivo desde Viena.
to hear
Se
from
conecta
Vienna
con nosotros
live
Jeffrey Sachs,
Jeffrey
un
Sachs,
reconocido líder
a
mundial en materia de
renowned
desarrollo
world
sostenible, que es
expert in
además
sustainable
ampliamente
development,
reconocido
who
por
is
todas
widely
sus
recognized
estrategias audaces
for
y
his
efectivas
bold and
para abordar
effective
desafíos
strategies
complejos
in
de la
addressing
reducción de la
complex
pobreza y
challenges,
el
including
cambio
poverty
climático.
reduction and addressing
Thank you,
climate
Jeffrey, for
change.
joining us. We are very eager to hearing you speak.
It's my great pleasure. Can you see me and hear me?
We hear you and we see a wonderful picture of you.
Great.
But we're here and we're hearing you, yes.
Good. And is it possible for the technicians to allow me to see you? Because I see myself right now for some reason.
Well, can we work on that, please? So you can see the wonderful audience here today.
It's a little boring for me to look at myself, so I would prefer to see all of you, which I was seeing a moment ago. Hold on. I don't know what happened. No? Well, I don't see you, unfortunately, but you can see and hear me. And I wonder if somebody could give me a little bit of context for today's discussion so that I can be most helpful for it. There, now I see you. Thank you very much to the technicians. Could you give me a little bit of background to today's discussion so I can be most useful and helpful for you? And also, could I ask the technicians to allow me to share my screen? I want to show one picture if I could.
Yes, we've been having a very interesting conversation with private and public stakeholders and politicians about the important skills that the youth need to have in today's world, a world that is advancing and changing socially, politically, and even climate change and the pandemic, all of these things that are making education one big issue, and so that's
Great.
what we've been talking about.
Very good. Okay, let me share some very basic remarks. I won't say anything shocking, but I want to say some things that are important. From every point of view, I'll start with economic development because people in the room are interested in that, and people are interested in jobs and skills and livelihoods, but also for human well-being, for the sake of our societies. There is no more important investment than education, period. So when we talk about youth skills and what kinds of skills, first, young people need to be in schools that work, that function. They need to be in school. They need to be learning. They need to have qualified teachers. They need to have the materials, access to the world of information. and being able to develop all basic critical skills. I mention this, though it's obvious, because it's not a foregone conclusion in the Western Hemisphere or actually in any part of the world. It's not happening for a large proportion of children in the world today. The education crisis is really a crisis, just to add to all the crises that we deal with every day. Education is not working, by and large, for most of the world's children. That's a strong statement, but I mean it. All of the data we see shows that around the world, children are not learning the basics of reading, writing, and mathematics skills, and knowledge of basic science. So this is not an issue foreign to our hemisphere and to the BID. And I want to emphasize that the international test scores are alarming when it comes to the Western Hemisphere. And we should really be taking this into account. I don't know if I'm talking about the things you want to hear, but these are the things that I think are extremely important. And I just want to show you what I think you will well know. Oops, if I can share. Hold on. Oh, I don't know if you're seeing. Are you seeing my screen by any chance?
No, we're not, but your remarks coincide with one of the messages that we've been hearing, and it is that education right now, it is a challenge, mostly in America, in Latin America and the Caribbean. And I think that an event like today, where politicians and change makers are gathered, at least shows that.
I was going to show you a map of the scores on the international PISA evaluations, which is the international project run by the OECD for comparability across education systems. What if the screen sharing had worked, you would see that all of Central America and all of South America is in the red at the very bottom of the performance. This is not for the whole world because only about 80 countries participate. But of those 80 countries, the very bottom of the list is Latin America. And we can't talk about more refined issues of advanced skills for coding or for research and development or for other things if at 15 years old, kids are not learning basic reading, science, and math that are appropriate for the skill levels, for the grade levels and age levels. And what we see is that on a score that is standardized for an average of 500, kids in Latin America are scoring under 400. And this is true in the major countries as well as in the smaller countries. So I think that this is a very deep issue. We should really work on not only trying to understand it, but trying to redress it and set a goal for this region that kids are performing at least at the average and hopefully above average. What we know are certain things. First, of course, there's profound inequality in the educational systems of Latin America because there's profound inequality in our societies. A lot of it is racially categorized and some simply by income. Second, for upper classes in the Americas, the reliance is on private schools. So public schools are underfinanced. Three, there are real budget challenges in financing a proper education system. And these I think are a central issue for the Inter-American Development Bank. If I may say so, I would think it's an urgent issue. I would also add that in my 25 years of trying to raise funds for global development, education always is shortchanged. I don't know why. I just don't understand why, actually, because there's nothing more important for society than looking after our children. And yet we don't do it. And on the international side, we don't fund it. There is no large-scale development assistance for education. There's no global fund for education. What we have are tiny band-aids compared to the real needs. I would add, obviously, that in our current day, we need also new skills. We need connectivity of our schools. Without question, it's not even a nice thing to have. It's an absolute essential thing to have, that kids have devices for connecting to the web and for being able to access information, e-libraries, integrating e-learning with classroom learning in effective ways is absolutely a necessary point. We need, of course, a curriculum that is renovated, and I think you, in briefing me briefly on the meeting, you mentioned what do kids need to know. And it's notable that in the Sustainable Development Goals, SDG 4.7 says everybody needs to know about sustainable development. They need to know about climate. They need to know about the environment in which they live. And they need to know about diversity, social inclusion, and respect for other cultures, and respect for a culture of peace. And so it's a very nice target, this target 4.7 of the Sustainable Development Goals. And it should be a focus of what we're really trying to do with our schools, which is to inculcate not only the basic analytical skills, which I started with, which are vital and foundational, but also the skills of living in an interconnected world, in diverse societies, and in a world that is in tumult over environmental change that needs to be addressed. So learning about the challenges of social inclusion, sustainable development, and global cooperation, I think are really essential. I think the rest is rather obvious, frankly. You know, if the 15-year-olds were well educated, which they're not, and were enabled to stay in school, there's no doubt that the successful societies are keeping kids in school, not only through secondary level, but through some kind of tertiary education. And the really highly successful economies are enabling half or more of young people to at least achieve a 4-year university degree. Quite a remarkable accomplishment. But look at what Korea is accomplishing, what Singapore is accomplishing, and the other countries that are at the top of the PISA charts. And incidentally, they're not only at the top of the education charts, but they're at the top of the income charts also, because this turns into jobs, livelihoods, startups, innovation, new approaches to problem solving, and so forth. So this is, again, I think a very major challenge. I know there are business people in the room. Businesses should partner with institutions of higher education in particular, and the institutions of higher education should partner with secondary schools to create a dynamic of improvement. Universities really are strategic actors in global knowledge and national knowledge. And it's very important for business to invest directly in helping to build the strength of universities, but then ensuring that universities build the strength of the overall educational systems in their countries, as well as, of course, networking internationally. I won't belabor these points except to say that the situation is just amazingly bad and made vastly worse by COVID, of course, because we've had 3 disrupted years of schooling in the United States. The legacy of this is kids that have really lost time, are far behind where they need to be. And that's in a country with a per capita income of nearly $70,000 per person. So we can imagine what's happening in much of the world. I was at UNESCO a couple of days ago. This is our global body that is charged with and empowered with helping to lead the effort for educational improvement. The main part of our talk was to mobilize financing so that the things I'm talking about can be achieved. Education is not inexpensive. It just happens to be the highest return investment we have in society. So it's really worth undertaking. And I thank you for inviting me, and I thank the Inter-American Development Bank for putting a focus on this issue. Please, the bank is the region's lead finance institution for the public good. And so anything I can do to work together with the bank on promoting this core investment, you can count on me. Thank you very much for letting me share these remarks with you.
Thank you very, very much, Jeffrey. We were able to see you. We are very curious to know the titles of the books you have behind you. And your sense of urgency, it really goes well with what we're talking about. No more band-aids, the importance of financing. Thank you for mentioning the importance of diversity, social justice, and also the environment. So thank you very, very much. Now in Spanish. The
discussion on the skills of the 21st century is a part of the agenda of educational systems in the region. But what do we see in evidence and experience? What are the most relevant skills for personal, economic, and social well-being of our youth nowadays? In order to delve deeper into these questions, we'd like to welcome Kay McConney, Minister of Education, Technological and Professional Training in Barbados, Robert Silva Garcia, President of the Central Board of Directors of the National Public Education Administration of Uruguay, Robert E. McGrath, Professor of Psychology at Fairleigh Dickinson University and Senior Scientist for the VIA Institute on Character, and Alejandro Adler, Dean of Student Life and Wellbeing at Upper Canada College. And as moderator for this very interesting conversation, would like to welcome Maria Loreto Dio, IDB Education Specialist. So this will be a discussion in English and in Spanish, and you can join the QR code that you will now see on the screen so that you can leave your questions, and at the end I will take care of a couple of these questions. Loreto, you have the floor.
Los ciudadanos del siglo XXI vivirán más años y harán frente a cambios medioambientales, sociales y tecnológicos que los obligarán a reajustar expectativas y ser parte de un mundo dinámico con nuevos retos y oportunidades. ¿Tienen los jóvenes las habilidades para enfrentar esta realidad? Complementando las habilidades fundacionales, la educación debe incorporar otras dimensiones que preparen a los jóvenes para la vida y les den bienestar. Las habilidades del siglo XXI son transversales y les permiten reinventarse, adaptarse e identificar nuevas y mejores oportunidades. Las habilidades digitales, cognitivas avanzadas y socioemocionales son claves para lograr la inserción laboral y social de los jóvenes. Debemos construir una educación a la altura del mundo actual. La disrupción es necesaria porque el futuro ya está aquí.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much, Matilda, and everybody for being here. And thank you, of course, to our panelists. Before the break, Matilda asked our virtual audience to share about the one skill that they believe had the most impact in their life and in their outcomes. And we receive a very vast variety of answers that go from love, hope, honesty, problem solving, critical thinking, hábitos de estudio, aprender a aprender. I mean, we got a huge variety of answers. So most of us at a personal level, it really seems that we recognize that all these skills are very relevant in our lives. So, but then the question is, and Robert and Alejandro have been doing very interesting work in this, how to decide among so many skills, which ones really matter for youth development and for future outcomes. So Bob, let me start with you. I mean, can you refer to this question?
Sure, it's a really good question, and I wish I had a good answer. But and I hope you've all seen the report that Alejandro and I put together, trying to make a first stab at this. And it's important to realize that in the absence of context and looking at this huge field, and we started with 30 different life skills that we think are really important, and narrowed it down over time to 10 based on 3 dimensions, really looking at these in terms of where's the evidence we have now about the extent to which these life skills are really worth targeting or can be effectively targeted. And so we looked at them on 3 dimensions, the first of which was measurement. As was mentioned this morning, you really can't know if something is improving unless you can measure it. And so we want to look at which of these 30 or so life skills we really have good measurement instruments. Secondly, meaningfulness, and what we meant by that was, is there evidence that changing these things can lead to consequential outcomes for kids, change their lives in important ways? And thirdly, we were looking at malleability. Do we actually have evidence that these can be changed? And one of the things that really struck us during this is how little evidence there is for so many life skills at this point. And so looking at these 30 life skills, these are the ones on the screen now that we really saw. There is evidence right now that we can make an important difference in kids' lives if we in fact impact on these.
Okay, so Bob, is this kind of a magical list? I mean, everybody in the region should be thinking about gearing their reforms to include these skills?
So the short answer to that is no, but I never stop at the short answer. So what I would say is that, you know, again, we started with 30, and we were really focusing on where the evidence is now. But that question of what are the life skills that matter, they really depend a lot on context and setting. So are you really concerned about kids' well-being? There are skills that are really important for that. Are you interested in kids' intellectual skills, ability to use information effectively, kids' ability to be productive? I could imagine every entity that's involved in this meeting today coming up with their own list out of that 30. But we give you that list of 30 as sort of a starting point to think about where do you want to put your efforts going forward. Just being aware that there is tremendous diversity in the amount of evidence we have for different life skills.
Can I do a follow-up question on that? I mean, you mentioned malleability. I mean, that means that there's evidence that those 10 skills can be changed in an educational setting?
Yeah, that's what we found, is that we were really looking for those skills where there is a substantial body of evidence saying, yes, schools have the capacity to change these things.
That's very interesting. I would love to go to our educational leaders, to Barbados and Uruguay, that both are working on reforms and including new sets of skills in that reform. And referring to Bob's explanation now, I mean, what skills have you been incorporating in your reforms, and does it make sense, you know, what we're talking about? And why? How did you choose them?
How did we choose them? A number of different approaches we took. There was no one way in which we chose those skills. The first, we started with what's the ideal person we are trying to create through the school system to be global citizens, with, in our case, Barbadian roots and with a Caribbean sensitivity. And so we have to understand that these students, they live in a world that is not the same. Living in Barbados, living in the Caribbean is not the same as living in China or somewhere else, and therefore context obviously matters. So we started with what's the ideal person who will thrive in this evolving environment. That was number one. The second thing we did was to look at what are those skills that are required for three things: for learning, for livelihoods, and for life in general. And we understood that education cannot be education for education's sake. They must be leading to certain outcomes. And the outcomes that are required, whether it comes to learning or livelihoods or life, we linked those skills to those livelihoods, to those areas. The other area we looked at was our national development and our regional development. We have to understand that we as a region, as a Barbados, we have certain national priorities in terms of development. And while there are certain technical skills that may be associated, there are also life skills that are associated, those that are transferable from one situation to another for those things. So fintech and computer science and those areas related to the blue and green economy, those areas related to climate change, those are all part of our reality. And as we develop students who are able to contribute in a meaningful way, in a way to things that are relevant to what's important to us, we have to make sure that they not only have the technical skills, but there are also life skills associated with that. We also recognized, and the World Economic Forum made the point, that those students who entered the school system in 2016, 65% of them will enter jobs that did not exist at that time. We therefore need to be preparing our students for jobs that do not now exist. And therefore, it is not the technical skills, because they are now being created, the jobs are now being created, but rather there are other types of abilities, their ability to adapt, their ability to be critical thinkers, their ability to work in teams and be collaborative, their media skills, their media literacy, their information literacy, their digital literacy, their civic literacy. And so there were a number of different approaches that we used. And we also said, you know what, in this world, there are businesses. And so we have struck partnerships with businesses. I'll give you a recent example. We now are going through a construction boom in Barbados. And we have created the Construction Gateway program for training that will link the opportunities in construction with the training of our students. Now, not only do they need technical skills, there are additional skills. And so the citizenship module, for example, is a mandatory part of that training, along with communication skills and others. And so the approach we have taken is a multi-pronged approach. And at the bottom of that, just to close off, is that there have been some conferences with students. The students are telling us what is not relevant that they're learning in schools. So it is not just the government telling the students, but these young people also pushing up on the system and expressing interests and expressing where they believe the school system is failing them and where we need to create greater emphasis. And in doing all of this, we have to make sure we do not create curriculum overload, where we put too many things in the curriculum and make it burdensome for the teachers and the students. We are therefore seeking to take an approach where we are integrating the life skills across all of those critical subjects that they need to study at this point in time.
Thank you so much. I think it's very interesting, and we're going to address that, I guess, later with the questions is how does a school look when we include all these new skills? But Robert, I want to go to you, to which skills were included in Uruguay and why? How did you choose them?
Well, first of all, my gratitude for the invitation and for being here. In Uruguay, we've come to the conclusion that there are a lot of things that have to be done, and that we've been talking about these for a long time, and that the time has come for us to make some decisions. In particular, this issue that brings us here today. It is essential, and it is of utmost importance to leave the traditional curriculum of content and that is focused exclusively in the cognitive side of things, just to give it a name, or basic learning, in order to go beyond this. And that is why we introduced a curricular transformation, a change in paradigm in the curricular policy of Uruguay. And the change in paradigm in the curricular policy of Uruguay implied the construction, first and foremost, of a whole set of basic documents, a general curricular framework establishing 10 basic skills, a progression in learning that generated profiles of segments to identify the progress made by students that will be used as orientation for families and for teachers, a new plan of basic education with initial education, and also with 9 continuous levels, 9 programs based on competencies and competition, and a new regulation for assessment to leave that paradigm of repetition that is deeply rooted in our countries as a basic element of assessment of students. And that clearly has led to different situations, and in particular, a discussion and a deliberation with a lot of participation from students. We also organized these events with teachers, with families, and we had national surveys, polls, using technology. We had thousands of students and families and students, teachers participating, giving their point of view. And on the basis of that, we developed not taking one evidence or one study, but taking many evidence, many samples that exist that tell us that the inequity of our educational systems also have a major component in the so-called social-emotional skills. And those that are in a vulnerable situation develop much less. What we saw here and what you propose based on the study developed. So we included these and we grouped them briefly in 2 major areas. One first area that is located in thought and communication, and we conceptualized this. We established different work levels, different nature to talk about critical thought thinking, to establish this as a general skill. And when we finish the mandatory cycle after the age of 12, 18, because a change in paradigm implies that to realize that when our educational systems were devised, it was starting on the basis that at the age of 18, students would opt out in the logic of educational continuity to go for orientation or professionalization that they would continue to do. And that has changed in our society. They must have skills before that, and therefore we established in thinking and communication, critical thinking, scientific thinking, computational thinking, creative thinking, and competition in communication.
And then we have another set that has to do with relations. We've established, for example, the interpersonal skills, interacting with others, the key local citizen skills, as well as digital citizenry and global citizenry, and as well as entrepreneurship, where ideas can be translated into specific achievements and measures. So these were some of the guidelines that we followed in this dialogue, and this new dialogue that required interactions at the national, international level, looking at digital skills as well, that places the country in a process that we've just embarked upon, because what comes later is going to be much more challenging challenging. Uruguay is right now in the implementation phase, because it's not just enough to have the instruments and documents in place. You also have to put this into practice in the classroom, and that's where all of the key stakeholders are involved. Thank you very much, and that leads me to the following question, and Alejandro as well. I think because of some of the resistance that we may encounter when these kinds of skills are implemented and included in these reforms.
It was very interesting to me that in the list that you shared before, mindfulness and empathy are at the top of the list. And I wanted to ask you, and maybe the rest of the panelists as well, what would you say to those that tell you, I mean, how can you be, talking about teaching empathy or compassion when we have so many gaps in the learning skills? I mean, how do you convince them? I mean, what kind of reactions have you had to that?
That's an excellent question. It's a question we get often from ministers of education and policymakers in general. And I think often these quote unquote soft skills, mindfulness, empathy, compassion, but also the other skills, critical thinking, problem solving, and so on, which there's nothing soft about them, or whether we want to call them life skills, 21st century skills, social emotional skills, but again, cognitive social emotional skills. There seems to be an idea that ethically they are luxury skills that can only come into pedagogy and curriculum after we have foundational skills, right? But that is, we have found incorrect. It's actually an empirical question. And we have found that there are 3 empirical arguments to infuse educational systems with these life skills. So first and foremost, we now have functional magnetic resonance imaging that shows us that when you include programs like mindfulness, empathy, compassion, critical thinking, problem solving, children, especially in early childhood development, at a neurological level, at the prefrontal cortex and amygdala, develop in terms of brain health much better than children who do not have these cognitive, emotional, behavioral, and social developments, just as important as nutrition. So that's the first argument. The second one is we've seen that in programs that we've replicated in 18 countries, where we've taught these life skills alongside literacy, numeracy, and science, after 2 years of teaching these life skills, students who learn these life skills alongside traditional curricula do much better in traditional standardized exams than students who don't, and particularly so in students from vulnerable populations. So when we've worked, for example, in slum schools in India, and slum schools in Nepal, in vulnerable populations in Bhutan, when we've worked with adolescents and children and practiced mindfulness, compassion, empathy, critical thinking, problem solving, group dynamics, and so on and so forth. After 2 years of implementing these programs, the intervention schools actually have an extra year of literacy and numeracy and scientific knowledge growth compared to quote unquote control schools that don't receive these. So the academic dividends are much higher when you invest in these life skills simultaneously. And if that were not enough, the life skills that we are proposing in the work that Bob and I produced are the life skills that employers are looking for and that ultimately contribute to what Aristotle posited 2,500 years ago, which is eudaimonia, the good life, right? So it's these life skills that not only lead to quote unquote success in your professional life, but to a life well lived. So whether it's brain health, whether it's academic success in the traditional sense, or whether it's well-being, I think there's now vast evidence that these skills can be taught and they should be taught.
Thank you. I'm going to have to be running because they're putting little papers over there. Alejandro, I want to follow up though. what does the ritual tell us about how to develop these skills in educational settings? I mean, what would you say are main issues that need to be taken into consideration to change the system so that these can be incorporated?
The single thing that we have seen is a key mistake when we've worked with governments is to think that by changing the curriculum, you'll change an education system, when in fact it's educators that are actually the psychosocial nodes of education systems. So if and only if educators learn and live these skills, whether they be mindfulness, compassion, empathy, critical thinking, leadership, creative thinking, and so on and so forth, whatever skills are most relevant and have measurability, malleability, and meaningfulness, they have to learn and live these skills to eventually be able to teach them explicitly and then to embed them across all academic subjects. So the main recommendation, if that's the answer to your question, is the focus on ongoing professional learning for teachers who are already teaching and changing initial teacher education so that teachers and leadership, also principals and staff, learn these skills themselves. They don't not only learn how to teach them, but they learn how to actually practice them.
Thank you. I guess quisiera como traer la misma pregunta de vuelta a nuestros líderes en educación.
Let me also reiterate the question to some of our educational leaders. You said that Uruguay has a long tradition, a recognized tradition and track record of incorporating technology in 21st century skills. So we are aware, and we know that there are many from the private sector aware of this. So I'd like to know exactly what are some of the key focuses. For example, if I had known this when I was young, I would have done such and such, or I would have made these changes. So what are some of the lessons learned that you can share with us? Well, speaking broadly, in my previous remarks, the changes, and I agree with what you just said, the educational changes in the curricular policies not just are done by developing new documents and instruments. You also need to ensure that you have changes in the way the teaching learning process is developed and conceived by the drivers. I'm talking about the students, I'm talking about the teachers and their families. Those are the main drivers. So that's significant. Those changes are significant. And that's why we are developing now new teaching training and skills, because teachers, not, as you said, not just learn these skills, they have to live it firsthand. So we include this not as a subject matter, but as a unit in the curriculum, together with others in the professional training of teachers, instructors. So when they receive their degrees, we have, for example, socio-emotional skills, we have new cognitive skills, and we need to bring that curriculum, as I was saying earlier, computer skills, and sometimes these are also absent in our teacher training programs, and also in the professional development overall. So the lesson learned here is that we need to emphasize much more in these areas. We are just launching the processes, but we need to involve our instructors, our teachers much more. We have to change paradigms, and to change paradigms, we need to change the role of instructors in learning and teaching. We need to also be not just teach knowledge, and of course students need to be on the receiving end, but we also have to develop a new learning space that includes involvement by all the stakeholders, and students also have to make changes, and we have to work with those students. Students have the right, and they also have the responsibility to demand quality teaching and training. It's not just a passive receiver, and that's how the teaching is developed in the classroom. classroom. And I think the minister from Ecuador said it very clearly. We've learned much more from this. And now we've realized that we were in bad shape, but we're even in worse shape now. So we have to develop strategies that involve the family. The family played a key role during the pandemic, for example, in many situations, especially in those vulnerable households. And the final challenge or lesson learned that I want to share with everybody is that
una visión diferente con la cual tenemos que convivir.
A vision that is different from what we have to live with. There are many sectors in our society, in our countries, that no longer believe in education. There are many high vulnerable contexts where families do not consider education an instrument for upward mobility. They don't see it as a pathway for their children to improve their lifestyles or living standards. And there are other sectors in society, however, that now believe that education, especially in our country, that generates, is a source of generating opportunities and upward mobility. They continue to play this role. So neither one, in our opinion, neither one is correct. We have to develop public policies to have direct interventions with them in order to regain the level of education, making sure that it is as relevant as possible by changing the curriculum, by changing the teaching and learning processes, so that we can reach out to those sectors that no longer believe in education as upward mobility instrument. You cannot have changes, meaningful changes in education, if the citizenry overall is not aware, if civil society is not aware that we must change the educational process. If we don't have that awareness of the key role played by education, in Uruguay, we're involved, right? We're in the middle of this process. It's not easy. It's a very complex undertaking, but we must be optimistic and have hope. We need to change that fear and apprehension that it worsens the uncertainties. We have to change that, turn it into hope that it can be achieved. And education is the fundamental tool in order to provide those opportunities for everyone, but in particular, those most disadvantaged. Those are our lessons learned. We need to intervene more with those key stakeholders, and we need to work on public policies that will address the current reality that we are at least facing in our country. Thank you very much. Those are daunting challenges. And again, very in-depth, and maybe Minister, I could ask you to respond
and ask you
to what was
what
just...
the challenges you see up front in Barbados to, go on with this reform that we should be all thinking about. I mean, how to support these challenges.
Thanks for the question. I think the point that was made by other colleagues remains true. If we don't get the educators' mindset, skill set, ready to lead this transformation from within, we will have a challenge. Because the children will not learn if the teachers cannot teach. And so it's going to be critical for us to continue to do that. And there's some work we've started with the Inter-American Development Bank and others that is already helping us to be able to make some moves towards not just training, but the ongoing professional development as this space evolves. In addition, we have taken a whole of country approach, meaning it is the teachers' unions that are involved. It is the students that are involved. It is the government that is involved. It's the parents, the national parents associations that are involved. And it has to be a whole of country approach. In fact, we are getting ready to go to public consultation. We have come together with some of the key education partners so far, and we have agreed in principle on some of the key priorities for our reform. And what will happen over the next 3 to 4 months is that we will now take those ideas for public consultation. Those will be refined through public consultation so that when we are done, it is actually a national whole of system effort as opposed to the government being the one that is proposing this. Finally, I would say that we have talked about transforming education, tinkering with the little bits and pieces that make up education. But more important than transforming education, we have to focus on transformative education that actually makes a difference in the lives of people. And that has to be where we begin. And that has to be where we end. Not just transforming, but being transformative of the lives of the students, of the lives of the teachers, and of the outcomes for an entire country and people.
I think there is no better way of closing this panel than those words. I don't know, do we have time for one question from the audience or one? Okay. A question from the audience. They ask, and I guess for any panelist, if you can address the importance or examples of critical skills or soft skills that are needed to combat disinformation and the amount of information that kids have today with the digital and that access. What are the soft skills that are needed to combat that?
Okay, sure. So I was really happy when we finished this thing that one of the skills that made it to the top 10 is critical thinking, because I do think that, at a time when democracy is in danger around the world, where jobs are changing so dramatically, where artificial intelligence is really going to be changing our world, we really, and the fact that half of the world is now on smartphones and connected to the internet, this is really, to me, when we talk about life skills that matter, boy, that one is right up there. And one of the things that when we reviewed the literature on critical thinking, because we both spent a lot of time reading stuff, that stood out for me was that the most effective critical thinking programs both had intentional instruction in critical thinking and also integrated it in every component of the curriculum. I thought that was beautiful because they were both getting the message and then it was permeating everything that they did. So I think it's a great question because we are in such a time of change culturally and technologically, and I really think that that's one that stands out for me.
Great. Thank you so much, and thank you for all panels for those answers. I think this is the beginning of a conversation. I mean, there's a lot of food for thought, and I really hope and invite you all to keep on dialoguing about these issues. Thank you so much.
Muy bien,
La educación tradicional no es suficiente para preparar a las personas ante la evolución de los mercados laborales y los complejos entornos cada vez más diversos y cambiantes a los que nos enfrentamos. Cerrar la brecha existente entre lo que aprenden los jóvenes y lo que requieren para su inserción laboral y social es imprescindible para aumentar la productividad, la equidad y el bienestar. ¿Es posible hacerlo de manera diferente? ¿Cuáles son las nuevas tendencias en la educación no tradicional? El sector público y privado deben avanzar juntos hacia la educación del futuro, porque el futuro ya está aquí.
Bueno, hay consenso en que hoy debemos ser aún más hábiles y eso requiere de propuestas atrevidas. Un mundo mejor requiere una mejor educación en donde el sector público y privado aporten soluciones. Dos apasionados por la educación, Ben Nelson, fundador y rector de Minerva University, y Vanessa Gibson, directora de Clima de Investigación de la Coalición Costarricense de Iniciativas de Desarrollo, que nos acompaña de manera virtual, nos hablarán sobre sus visiones disruptivas para el desarrollo de las habilidades del siglo XXI. Este Fireside Chat será moderado por Mercedes Mateo, jefe de la División de Educación del BID. Bienvenidos, los oímos.
Thank you so very much. Gracias. So I want to start by thanking all of you, authorities, experts, private sector, public sector, for being here today. It's really great to see you all. And also, I want to take advantage of being here to say hello to everybody that is connected, because I heard that there is a lot of, over 1,000 people connected on YouTube and other social media. So I really want to say hello to all of you and thank you for following us today. This panel is going to be hybrid, so I hope it works. It seems that we see Vanessa. Hello, Vanessa.
Hi, everyone.
Good to see you. And I want to start by making a short reflection about what we have heard today. And I think one of the messages that we've heard repeatedly is that we have a crisis in education. We've heard that from Andreas. We've heard that from Jeffrey Sachs in his keynote speech. The kids are not learning the basics, but they are not learning either these other skills that are essential for life. So they are not getting the skills for life, but also, and this is what we're going to discuss now, they are not getting the skills for work. And I think the minister from Barbados mentioned that the importance of not only the life skills, but also the technical and skills for work. And even more important is that kids are not motivated. They are not staying in schools. They drop out from schools. And that means basically that they don't transition into post-secondary and higher education programs. This means also in an increasingly complex world that the kids are not getting the sophistication that they need in terms of those skills in order to be able to respond to the requirements of the job market. That's a little bit of an ugly picture that I've just drawn, but as the Minister of Education from Ecuador mentioned, I also tend to be an optimistic. So the conversation today is precisely going to be about solutions, and I want to thank both Ben and Vanessa because they are the president of the IDB at the beginning. In his opening remarks, he mentioned the importance of bringing into the conversation the non-traditional actors. Both Ben and Vanessa are non-traditional actors in the education field, and I think that's precisely why the conversation about skills for work is going to be so interesting. Ben, I want to start with you, introducing you. Ben was the very successful CEO of Snapfish. At some point in his life, he decided to drop the private sector and move into a different activity, which was education. He followed his passion for education, and he created a completely new model, disruptive model of education, which is the Minerva Project. Vanessa is also a huge talent, this time not from the Israel and the US as Ben, but from the region, from Costa Rica. And she is actually she works at the investment promotion agency CINDE in Costa Rica to improve the business and investment environment and opportunities in the country. So two really interesting profiles to talk about skills for the importance of skills for work and skills for life. So here's the question for the two of you. When we face a crisis, we need to ask bold questions. And the question I want to ask you is, what is the purpose of education in both your institutions, in Minerva and CINDE? What is your vision? What do you want to achieve? How do you contribute to close the skills gap that we face today, that our systems face today? And how is, and this is, I think, the most important question, how is your value proposition different from other services or other supply of services in education that we have out in the market? Vanessa, go ahead.
Great. Thank you very much, and thank you for opening this space. Well, from an investment promotion agency that has been able to attract over 400 companies to Costa Rica in 4 distinctive high-tech companies, it's very challenging because we have to maneuver between governments, between academia, local academia, and the driving force of the transformation of multinational companies in our country. And basically what we see normally, and the value proposition and the challenge that we have, or the opportunities that we're seeing, is that in the meantime that academia and government is still questioning themselves about these topics and kind of trying to understand how they will address the challenge and how they're going to close the gap, companies are moving, I would say, strategically faster and reaching out almost directly to that audience that we are aiming to tap. So in WorkCase, for example, we are actually gathering constantly, not just the needs, but actually the emphasis that companies are doing related to skills and what type of skills they need and who should deliver, the training, the certifications and such, which, by the way, it's not necessarily the academia, the traditional academia or the government. So it's very interesting because we have to be politically correct and we have to work and assist the government of Costa Rica in its transformation, but at the same time, for us to seize the opportunity of these jobs that these companies are bringing to the country, we need to be also assertive and also strategic in terms. So the value proposition for us has been to hear both sides of the table, companies, but also talent. And I think on the previous panel, I think the minister from Barbados mentioned something that is critical, and it's been an experience for us. We have to listen to the people, not just the kids that are in school, but in WorkCase, workforce development is strategic. So we have to listen as well to that father or mom or that person that drops out of the high school or the university system to understand how well we could serve them, to build their skills and get them back in the labor market. So actually with the support of the IDB and CRUSA, we were able 4 years ago to launch a project that is called Future Up, where basically the aim of it is actually to serve as a, I would say, a platform in which you learn about your skills and you actually receive suggestion through a AI engine that would suggest academic paths or mostly skill development strategies, where we have been working with the industries to narrow down which are the critical skills, what type of training and certifications people need. And with that, we could suggest over the platform those what we call learning paths towards that training availability. Bringing up to the table as well non-traditional players such as Coursera and other great partners that we have on the platform, and where people, once they discover their needs and discover the opportunities, they have the chance then to start develop those skill sets, both the one that we call soft, but mostly technical skills, and route them towards the job opportunities that they can find in country.
Thank you so very much, Vanessa. Ben.
There's we often hear about this theory, right, where somebody from the past were to come today and they wouldn't recognize anything that we do in society, not how we eat, not how we travel, not how we communicate, but they'd go into a classroom and they'd find it completely familiar. I think that's being kind. I think if Aristotle was to live today, or Socrates, they would be amazed at everything else, but when they would look at our education system, they wouldn't recognize it. They would be shocked at how primitive it is, because we've actually regressed in our educational system as opposed to progressed. And even when we talk about things like skills and saying, oh, okay, well, it's not just about content, because of course you can get content, we still use the lens of this completely primitive approach to education, which is linear, right? You know or you don't know. You have a 92 or an 87. You have competency, you don't have competency. You know the skill, you don't know the skill. That's absurd. That has nothing to do with education. At the core of education is wisdom. Wisdom is knowing what to do in a situation you have never encountered before. And today, our lives are full of those types of situations. Thousands of years ago, hundreds of years ago, in fact, even 100 years ago, a normal human being would rarely encounter situations they weren't familiar with. They wouldn't leave their hometown. They would rarely change a profession. They would usually pursue the profession that their parents were in. It was a very simple life. You had knowledge, you could use it. You had the context in which you could use it. But today, the entire point of getting a human being prepared for life is to enable them to apply what they have learned in one context into another. And what makes the Minerva approach so different is that wisdom is at the center of our approach. Now, in higher education, and secondary education as well, the concept of teaching transferability or transferable skills, or having the ability to transfer, is not an accident. It doesn't happen because you say, oh, okay, I'm going to teach you critical thinking, and now you'll be able to critical thinker. In fact, sorry to break it to you all, there's no such thing as critical thinking. Critical thinking doesn't exist. Critical thinking is a moniker, which is a basket for all sorts of other skills, right? That they themselves are a basket for all sorts of other skills. And if you try to teach critical thinking as a thing, you will fail, right? The only way to teach critical thinking, as we've done now for a decade, is to break it down into its component parts. Teach every single one of them, and then have the student apply and repeat, as the folks in the past panel have talked about, in context after context after context, until the intuition gets wired into their brain. Now, that is an entire system of curricular pedagogical approaches that combine classroom in-practice learning and, most importantly, feedback. So let me just end on this one core concept. We talked about the traditional linear approach. So imagine two students, again, use whatever linear approach you want. Let's just use 92 versus 87 because it's so common. You see two students, one has a 92 average, the other one has an 87 average. You would automatically think the 92 average student is better than the 87 average student. Now imagine that the 92 average student has demonstrated that average by applying whatever they're evaluated on in 3 contexts. Yet the 87 average student has demonstrated whatever they've been evaluated on, same thing, across 48 different contexts. Who's the better student? Who would you want to hire? Who would you want to entrust with decision-making that affects the lives of your family? Our education system has no visibility into that angle. Our assessment system doesn't even contemplate how you use the knowledge that you learn. And with a very simple example, I hope you can all see that's actually the only thing that matters.
Thank you so very much, the two of you. I know that we are short of time, but you know what? I don't care. I think this conversation is too great, so you would. I'm sorry, I apologize in advance. I'm going to take a little bit of extra time because I want to continue just a little bit more. I want to emphasize 2 points. One from Vanessa, speed, listening, the speed at which they respond to when they listen to the needs of the companies, they respond fast. And the second point from Ben, it's about the wisdom, the transferability of knowledge and skills into different settings. Now I move very quickly to the next question. And of course, you couldn't escape a question about chat GPT, which is the trending topic of the moment. Listen to this. Chat GTP, this is a headline from a newspaper. Chat GPT passed a Wharton MBA exam and it is still at its infancy. One professor is sounding the alarm. So Chat GPT passed a Wharton MBA exam. That's the news. So some people have compared automated text generation to the invention of the printing press, right? So, and we've seen already some concrete reactions from universities. And Australian universities are going to bring back pen and paper to make sure that the students do not use artificial intelligence when they do the exams, right? That's the reality. That's the world we are living in, speaking to your point. So my question to you both is, do we kill technology or do we reinvent the exams?
Well, I have completely agree that we need to reinvent the exam for so many reasons, but particularly because they need to adapt to what is our new generations and how, we're youngsters, if we're thinking about kids and, young guys in the high school system, they should be evaluated in the full context of their potential and their reality, as well as, workforce. I just think we need to adapt, and I think we need to actually modernize as much as we can our educational system at a really fast pace, by the way, because it's competing right now with so much, and particularly when we think, and because of the listening process that we're getting from students from all ages, keeping kids in school, it's not just about, setting a law and actually having some goodies at the school cafeteria and such. It has to attract their intellect. And I think there is where we have to be challenged. And with that, definitely, we have to redo testing and the entire educational and training experience for people.
You kill the exam. When we started Minerva, I started Minerva 12 years ago. We've never administered a single exam in a single Minerva course at our own university, at our partner institutions, in high schools, in professional learning. Exams do not exist. Yet we evaluate our learners every single day, every day. And we evaluate them in all sorts of different contexts, right? And so, and you can compare and contrast. And there are different levels of deliberation. So we can see, for example, when you give students assignments and you see how they apply a particular learning objective, a particular skill, you can see what happens when you prompt them to apply it versus when you don't prompt them and see if they can naturally come up with it. You can see what happens when you give them a week to think about it versus when you ask them on the spot, right? You can see what happens when they apply it when on their own work or when they critique somebody else's work. You can see when they apply it in one subject versus another subject. And you can look at how well someone does something to see if they're generating it themselves or if they're using an external tool of any kind. ChatGPT, of course, is a very powerful one, but so is just cheating or asking somebody else. And when you shift the incentive of education away from cram for the exam, pass the exam, forget everything that was on the exam, which is really what our entire educational system is today, and instead actually create an incentive system where you demonstrate mastery and proficiency and novel application over and over again. Now, it's not about cheating. It's not about, passing the mark. It's about actual learning. It's about what you can do with what it is that we've studied. It helps with persistency, helps with achievement, and far most importantly, it helps with real education.
Final question. One of the critiques to private sector-led initiatives is usually scalability and equity. What do you think about that? How is Minerva and CINDE responding to the scalability issue, bringing smart solutions to a majority, and how do we solve the challenges of inequality that are pervasive in the region?
In our case, actually, precisely because of the equality, objective that we need to actually have as part of our project, is getting all the right players on the same table. And there's where probably the major contribution of governments, not to see these projects like, this is the private sector and they should finance it or whatsoever, but actually working as a team, because in any case, much of what we're doing has more impact in the lesser favorable families as such. So we need the government to actually have or joint effort and provide additional resources for areas that are very challenged, that they are poorly, embedded with infrastructure and such to get as part of this. Because when we limit this to say, this is a private project, and this is for the private sector, or this is for a specific industry, like in our case, where companies or in the majority of cases, people would say, oh, those jobs are for only high-end people, which doesn't have a straightforward understanding of what a high-end person is. We need to actually just consider them as opportunities in which we are able to fast-track methodologies and experiences and such that will make the effort of the government throughout the country, throughout the entire society, be more impactful. So the role of governments is not just necessarily to finance, but actually to bring the equality portion of it. How can we get the best resources to the most needed people?
Yeah, so there's good news and bad news on Scalability. The good news is that anybody in any government can fully embrace the diploma mill industrial complex. And for pennies, make sure that you hand out completion degrees to all of your citizens in anything you want, because that is what is available right now. You can go online, do something on autoplay, answer some ABCD questions at the end, get something wrong, answer it again until you get it right, complete a course, and then you can say, great, everybody is educated. Cost you practically nothing, and you can show all sorts of lovely statistics. Here's the bad news. If you actually want to ensure that real education happens in your country, you have to invest money. Real education requires the exploration live of a group of peers struggling not between the black and white, not between what's true and not true. That's easy. That's, again, you can do that automated. It's about looking between the black and the gray. What certainly can't be a right answer and what's potentially a correct answer. What do you have to do as far as nuance? How do you think about problems that are complex? That is social learning. And social learning requires an expert to lead a group. It requires a group of students, and it requires the infrastructure to ensure, usually digital infrastructure, to ensure that what occurs in a class environment is connected to the rest of the curriculum, that it's not a bubble. It's not something that happens with one teacher in one school group and then they go off and they do something completely different in the next session. Now, the important part is that even though it does require an investment, that investment is affordable if you do it right. And the return on the investment is huge. So as an example, last week at the World Economic Forum, Minister of Education of the United Arab Emirates was talking about university transformation that we have been driving in the UAE with one of the 3 federal universities of the country, where it's a 10,000 undergraduate student body that educates a broad swath of the Emirati population. And within 5 years, they are sunsetting 100% of their traditional higher education programs and transforming them all into Minerva interdisciplinary programs. Now, again, this is at a federal level, and it requires an investment to make that transformation happen, but it is for a broad swath of the population to dramatically improve learning outcomes. And by the way, we've seen only in our 2nd year some of the extraordinary outcomes of that population of students and how they've advanced tremendously, not just on the areas that we've introduced that are new, but again, looking at measuring their old competencies and how much they've increased over time. So it can be done, but it means it's a serious commitment.
Thank you so very much, Ben and Vanessa. We're going to end the session here. And I just wanted to share with you something that I was thinking as the morning was unfolding. And a few months ago, education leaders around the world gathered in New York in the Transforming Education Summit. I see many faces here that were that met in New York. Actually, I was thinking, I loved what the Minister of Education from Barbados shared with us this morning, this is not about transforming education. This is about transformative education. So I want to leave you all with this message. Thank you so very much for being here today, and wait for what's coming, because it's you're really going to enjoy. Thank you.
Thank you.
Canta el alma de mi raza en el bunde de Castilla, y este canto es sol que abraza.
Colombia. 51.266.000 habitantes, más de 65 lenguas nativas e innumerables sonidos naturales que convierten a Colombia en un lugar mágico, con su propia banda sonora. DNA Music, la Fundación Agdiboca, Focusrite y el Banco Interamericano de Desarrollo se dieron a la tarea de no solo formar musicalmente a más de 5.000 colombianos de todas las regiones, culturas y tradiciones, sino también fortalecieron su conocimiento empresarial en la industria de la música. Muévete es la revolución de la formación de artistas musicales en Colombia.
La juventud de hoy es creativa.
Our youth today is creative, passionate, and a sample of this is a young artist of the program Muévete, Move in Colombia. This program is supported by the Japanese Fund with the strategic support of the member of the coalition Focusrite, and we express our special gratitude that we address to them. Let me introduce Mel Meri, Sebastián Hatun, and Leonardo Andrés Santiago. Welcome. We're very excited to get to know you, to meet you, and particularly now so we can hear you. Let us hear 3 pieces of information on each one of you. Let us begin with Sebastián. Hello, everyone. Unfortunately, we cannot hear the speaker. Thank you very much, Sebastián. Good afternoon. My name is Mel Meri. I come from the Colombian Pacific, from Cali, and I am a DJ, and I'm involved in audiovisual production in political science and Scientology. And Leo? I live in Minnesota. I come from Barranquilla. And what I like doing is composition, creation, musical creation, and I'm also an industrial engineer. Thank you. You've been involved in 10 months in this Muévete program. Please tell us the impact that this program has had on your life, Sebastián. This program allowed me to go back to musical projects that I had dropped because of different fears, and it gave me the strength and the hope to continue and to forge ahead in this musical industry with so much talent. This allowed me so that I could think that music is a place where we can share, where we can transmit, where we can have an impact from art. Leo, for me, this program allowed me to have all this theory that we need to add to my creations, my productions, and it took things a step further on everything that I had. And before we can hear you, please tell us what is the skill that has been the most helpful in your personal development. Motivation, definitely, as I was saying previously, the program helped me overcome many fears. I had a recording studio in my room. I started doing music and selling music. So I took off and I went back into many interesting things for me and for my family. Motivation, that's good. You, my skill is to learn how to learn. It's important to acknowledge the place of my learning, my context, and the tools at my disposal to learn different skills every day, different paths in order to reach those creations and to do songs the way I like them in the Latin American electronic music. Learn how to learn. Leo, For me, empathy as a method when we have creation and production, precisely to bring all those who hear my music, to bring those feelings so that we can share these feelings amongst us. Thank you very much. And now what we were expecting, this is high time to share with you the talent, the Colombian talent of these young folks. So let us hear what they have to share with us.
Estoy comiendo valla roja de tu huerto, estoy mirando cepelines de cristal, ya están volando las palabras que diré, te quiero, diré, te amo, diré, te espero, ¿y tú qué dirás? Estoy sintiendo la señal de algún puerto, estoy oyendo tus canciones en un mar, estoy bebiendo las palabras que diré, te quiero, diré, te amo, diré, te espero, ¿y tú qué dirás? Y es que contigo la vida tiene que ser de verdad, tiene que sentirse lindo, ser en tu historia el galán y susurrarte al oído cuando te vuelva a encontrar. Mírame, quéreme, sentate conmigo y contame tus penas, cumbiana, tus sueños sublimes, contame. Tan madura la grosella de tu cuento, sembrado de jureres todo el mar. Ya están volando las palabras que diré, te quiero, diré, te amo, diré, te espero, ¿y tú qué dirás? Y es que contigo la vida tiene que ser de verdad, tiene que sentirse lindo, ser en tu historia el galán y susurrarte al oído cuando te vuelva a encontrar. Mírame, quéreme, sentate conmigo y contame tus penas, cumbiana, tus sueños sublimes, contame. Y será, si tú lo quieres y lo sueñas, y dime si el olvido se robó tus mañanas, dime si lloraste la ternura y la rabia, dime si tú quieres muevo yo la montaña y sanamos juntos el dolor de la patria, en una casita que tenga una bandera, para que me quieras como quiero a mi tierra, un bosque, un perro, un mecedor de madera, un cuarto rosado donde duermo una estrella. Muchas gracias al Banco Interamericano de Desarrollo, es un gran honor para nosotros, un privilegio estar acá. Gracias a todos los aliados, a la Academia DNA Music, a nuestro director José Miguel Luna y David Nájera, desde Cali, Colombia, Astromel en el beat, ahí está. Eso, Mel. Y desde Medellín, Antioquia, aquí está nuestro vocalista y guitarrista Leonardo Santiago. Y desde Barranquilla y Aracataca, Colombia, su servidor, guitarrista y vocalista Sebastián Hatun para usted. Mírame, quéreme, mírame, quéreme, sentate conmigo y contame tus penas, cumbiana, tus sueños sublimes, contame. Mírame, quéreme, sentate conmigo y contame tus penas, cumbiana, tus sueños sublimes, contame. Muchas gracias a todos. Un privilegio estar acá. Muchas gracias.
Mil gracias.
Thank you very much.
Mil gracias a
Thank
Leo,
you,
a
Leo,
Mel y
Mel,
a
and
Creo que
Sebastián.
esta fue
I
una
believe that this
presentación
was
espectacular,
a
para
wonderful
finalizar
presentation,
este
a
evento.
beautiful show to put an
Y
end to
ahora,
this event. And now,
después de escuchar a estos chicos
after
maravillosos,
hearing these
para cerrar el
wonderful
evento, invito
young
al
people,
al
I'd like to
vicepresidente de
invite
sectores
the
y
Vice
conocimiento
President
del
for
BID,
Sectors and
el
Knowledge of the
señor
IDB, Mr. Benigno Lopez
a decir unas
Benitez,
palabras de
to
cierre.
address these closing remarks.
Buenas tardes a todos.
Good afternoon, everyone.
Un gusto realmente estar con
It
ustedes
is a
hoy.
truly a pleasure
No
to
sé
be
cómo
with
hago
you
después de
today.
esto.
I don't know
Van a tener que estar
how to
conmigo
do and what
y
to do
acompañarme
after
un rato.
this
Realmente
so that I can
qué
be
mañana
with you
productiva
these
tuvimos.
minutes. This was a
Qué
very
mucho aprendimos
productive
hoy
morning. We
del
learned a
diálogo
lot
que se
today.
inició acá en el BID. Qué triste
This day
por
that
lo
we spent at
rezagados
the
que estamos en la
IDB,
región
it
en
is sad to
educación
see how
y
the
qué poco
region
lo
is
que
lagging
estamos
behind
haciendo
in education and
para
how little
poder
is being done
revertir
in order to
esta
revert
situación. Yo creo
this
que la
situation. I
educación es la
believe
base de
that
todo.
education is a
Acá en el
basis
BID
of it all.
creemos eso
Here
también.
at the IDB,
Y con
we
una
are
mejor educación
convinced,
seguramente las cosas
and
nos irán
with
mucho
a
mejor en
better
la región.
education, things
Y
will
les agradezco
go
a
better
todos
in the
ustedes
region.
por el
I thank
esfuerzo que
you
están
all
haciendo
for
en
the
sus
effort that you're
diversos
making
lugares
from
en ir
different
mejorando esto.
corners
Sabemos
in
que es una
improving this. We know
tarea difícil
that
y
this is a
complicada,
difficult and
pero como dice la
complicated
ministra de Ecuador,
task,
somos
but as the
todos
Minister
optimistas
for
de que
Ecuador
algún
was
día
saying, we're all
vamos a llegar a
optimists
un
that
buen
one
fin.
day will arrive at
Realmente un honor
Safe
para mí dar
Haven.
estas palabras
It
de
is truly
cierre
an honor for
hoy
me
en
to
el
give
Día
these closing
Internacional
remarks
de la
today
Educación,
on the International Day
porque
of
como se ha
Education, because
reforzado a
as
lo
it
largo de la
has been
mañana,
reinforced throughout
para
this
abordar los
morning,
mayores retos de
to
nuestra
address
región
the greatest
se
challenges in
requiere
our
una
region,
visión
a
sistémica de
systemic
la
vision
educación.
of education is required.
Hoy escuchamos y
Today, we
aprendimos en la
hear and
intervención de las
learn
perspectivas de
from
líderes
the
globales sobre la
interventions and
necesidad de proveer
perspectives
a
of
nuestros
global
jóvenes
leaders
con
on the need to
oportunidades
provide our young
para
people with
desarrollar
opportunities
habilidades,
to develop the
conocimientos,
skills,
valores
knowledge,
y actitudes
values, and
para llevar
attitudes
adelante sus
to
proyectos
carry
de
out
vida.
their life projects.
Considero que en honor a la
I believe
juventud
that in honor of
deberíamos
our
adoptar
youth,
dos valores
we
de su
should
esencia,
adopt two
el
values of
idealismo
its essence,
y la orientación a la
idealism
acción.
and orientation to
Estos motores
action.
de cambio
These
son
drivers of
fundamentales para
change are
superar las
critical
numerosas
to
barreras
overcome the
que
many
enfrenta la
barriers
región.
faced by the
Uno de los
region.
mayores
One
desafíos
of the
del sistema
greatest
educativo hoy tiene que
challenges
ver con
of
lograr
the
la
education
pertinencia
systems
de los
has to
aprendizajes
do
para
with
los jóvenes.
achieving the relevance of
En un
learning for
mundo
young people.
cambiante,
In a
cuando hablo de
changing world,
pertinencia,
when I
no
talk
solo me
about
refiero
relevance,
a la
I
necesidad de
not only
incorporar
mean the
los
need
avances
to
tecnológicos a
incorporate
las aulas,
technological
sino
advances
más
in the
bien a
classroom,
combatir la
but rather
desconexión que
to
existe
combat
a
the
menudo
disconnect that
entre
often
el currículo
exists
y las necesidades
between
de
the
la sociedad,
curriculum and the needs of
entre la
society,
escuela
between
y la
school
comunidad más amplia.
and the wider
Es por ello que
community.
se vuelve
That is
fundamental
why it becomes
reconectar a los
essential to
alumnos con su
reconnect
entorno,
students with their
generando
environment,
lazos y redes para que
generating
cada estudiante se
ties
sienta
and
involucrado en
networks
su
so that each
experiencia de
student
aprendizaje
feels
y
involved in
adquiera
their learning
la
experience
herramienta
and
que
will
necesita
acquire
para
the
ser
tools that
feliz
they
y
need
vivir en
to be
armonía.
happy and live in
Decía
harmony.
Confucio
Confucius
que la
said
educación
that
genera confianza,
education
la
generates
confianza
trust,
genera
trust
esperanza
breeds
y
hope,
la esperanza
and
genera
hope
paz.
breeds peace.
Reflexionando sobre lo conversado,
Reflecting on what
hago
was
una síntesis
discussed,
de
I
tres
make
temas
a
centrales
synthesis
con
of the
preguntas
three
para el
central
futuro.
or core
En
issues
primer
with
lugar,
questions for the future. First of
resaltamos
all,
hoy que el
we
desarrollo de
emphasize
competencias
today
debe
that
ser
the
un proceso
development
que
of
se
these
construye
skills must
a lo
be a
largo de
process that
toda la
is built
vida.
throughout life.
Con este
With this
objetivo
goal
en
in
mente,
mind,
¿cómo estamos
how are
estructurando las
we
rutas de
structuring
aprendizaje
learning
para
paths
abordar
to
todo el
address
ciclo
the
de vida,
entire life
evitando
cycle,
así fragmentaciones
thus avoiding
existentes en el sistema
fragmentations
actual?
existing in the current
Esto
system?
me lleva al
This
segundo
brings
punto.
me to the second
Para
point.
lograr una
In
formación
order to
continua,
achieve
la
lifelong
educación debe ser
learning,
el puente
education
entre las
must be the
necesidades de
bridge
los distintos
between the
sectores.
needs of the different
Está
sectors.
claro que la
It is
educación
clear
debe
that
ser tarea
education
de
must
todos.
be everyone's a task. How do we really manage to involve all actors in this titanic task? Thirdly, the search for consensus on education as a pillar of human development and the prosperity of our societies is key. How to fund this? I have been in the shoes of the regions and finance ministers, and from that role, I am aware of the enormous pressure countries face to finance public policies that guarantee the well-being of their citizens. Taking into account that education is an investment in the medium and long term, how do we manage to sustain public policies both programmatically and financially? It is clear that this is not an easy task. We need brave teachers willing to bet on the paradigm shift, even if the current system is not easy to innovate. We need to support families who engage with their children and youth at every stage of their cognitive and social emotional development. Finally, we need visionary leaders who create the necessary conditions to implement structural reforms and achieve a transition that safeguards effective policies beyond the people. I conclude by thanking the JP Morgan Foundation for the strategic support and for co-organizing this event. I thank all the audience here and also those who joined us virtually for their participation. Thank you very much, and I hope that you have a good end to today.
Thank you for coming to this event, and for those of you that were online via the internet, as well as the specialists, ministers. We hope that you've enjoyed this event as much as we did, and we hope to see you very soon.